What's up? Ghost Fictions is here and we're back again. This is a story where Izuku had smoke manipulation quirk. Izuku's parents had cool quirks. His mother has a rather weak telekinesis, but it was useful for a number of tasks. His father can breathe fire. He could have been a popular hero if he'd wanted to, but he'd never aimed for it. Izuku got potentially the worst combination of those powers. Smoke manipulation. A terrible power for a hero wannabe. Especially when your already arrogant underclassman got a cool quirk like explosion. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations and support the amazing author Diamond-Dragon23 for writing this story. Now, let's get into the story. Izuku first discovered his quirk on his 5th birthday. As he leaned forwards to blow out the candles on his birthday cake, the thin, wispy trails of smoke leaned away from him, forming the same pattern and moving at the same time. The little 5-year-old stared at the white tendrils for under a second before his eyes narrowed in what was an incredible amount of focus for a 5-year-old boy. To his mother's surprise and his glee, the smoke moved and wound together into a ball over the All Might-themed cake. There was a lot of crying in the Midoriya household that night. Izuku spent hours on end sitting in front of the small fireplace, playing with the dark smoke created there. He sometimes got sooty and covered in ash, which exasperated his mother to no end, but he never once stopped playing with it. The quirk itself was quite weak. An unfortunate combination of flame breath and attraction of small objects. Rather than pyrokinesis, telekinesis or some other form of powerful fire, mental quirk, Izuku could control a tiny, fist-sized ball of smoke. Even so, he loved it. He could create whatever shapes he desired so long as they remained small enough to be fist-sized. He had absolutely perfect control over the amount of smoke he could influence. He could even breathe it like air. That discovery had almost put poor Inko into cardiac arrest. Little Izuku was content with his quirk. The other children were not. Children are cruel creatures. Whether it be from jealousy or pride, they do their best to pull themselves up and others down. 4-year-old Kitsuki Bakugo was not an exception. He discovered his own quirk 6 months after Izuku and was immediately hefted atop the totem pole by it. He could sweat a nitroglycerin-like substance and detonate it from his palms. Explosion. The perfect quirk for a hero. Itsuki's ego grew and grew until he believed himself superior to everyone else. Especially the useless Deku. What's a bit of smoke going to do against a villain? Make him cough. Make his eyes water. Who would support someone that weak when you could praise the kid with explosive hands? So Izuku played alone. Stealing the smoke of whatever adult was smoking near the park and heading off into the trees to play with his only friend. His quirk. Pathetic, right? 9 years later, and Izuku was still friendless. He'd made considerable progress with his powers, but everybody just focused on the flashy, loud, abrasive underclassman Kitsuki Bakugo. Izuku could perfectly control smoke contained within an area somewhere around his own size. He'd recently discovered he could change the smoke's color, which he hadn't found a use for yet, but it was cool to know. His quirk wasn't good for battle. It could be used as a distraction or to impair his enemy's vision, but it was a double-edged sword. He couldn't see through smoke any better than anyone else could. Trying to suffocate someone with it was a bad idea. That could very easily turn fatal to the target, and Izuku did not want that on his conscience. So he trained his body a little. Not to a ridiculous degree, he ran every morning and lifted some light weights every now and then, but he wasn't muscular by any definition. Izuku had also looked up some martial arts online. It was a little late to just decide to pick one up, so he had the basic moves somewhat memorized, but he really wasn't all that good at it. He had been working on a super move for the entrance exam, but it was a little very dangerous. Depending on what the exam entailed, it might not even be a valid option. He'd also solved the biggest problem of creating smoke to actually be able to use his quirk. He'd contacted a small support company that made support technology for teenagers preparing for the hero course. It was mainly used for focusing a quirk's output or dampening it if it couldn't be done manually by the user. For Izuku, they made cigarettes. They weren't real cigarettes, there was no tobacco or nicotine in them, they were made to create as much thick smoke as possible in a short amount of time. He had asked for that particular design for 2 reasons. 1, it was amusing watching other people's reactions to his smoking problem. 2, it disguised the fact that he couldn't produce smoke himself. A villain would see a cigarette and just ignore it. It wouldn't be the hero's only method of attack now, would it? Once again, Inko almost had a heart attack when Izuku showed her the box. She'd eventually agreed it was a good idea, but only after making Izuku promise he wouldn't start smoking for real about 20 times. Izuku took his seat near the back of the huge auditorium. Several of his classmates were sat around him, snickering to one another about the useless nerd trying to take the exam. Fortunately, the lights dimmed soon after he'd sat down, and a familiar figure walked on stage. Hey. How is everybody here doing? Are you excited? Can I get a YEHHH? President Mick shouted with his quirk voice. The hall remained silent. Izuku shouted yeah inside his head. That's alright, you're all probably nervous huh? Well. Why don't we get things started? The hero went on to explain the practical exam. The written exam had already taken place earlier in the week, which several of the examinees were thankful for. Having the stress of both exams in one morning would be the worst. Once the explanation was over, Izuku sighed in relief internally. His pseudo-super move would be very useful during the exam. The hours on end he'd put into training it wouldn't be in vain. Izuku stepped off the bus, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pack of his smoke burners. He lit the end of one and took a long pull, blowing the smoke out and moving it to orbit in a ring around him. One or two of the other teens raised an eyebrow, but most people were too busy psyching themselves up for the exam. He slipped the box and lighter back into his pocket, breathing out another stream of smoke. Each cigarette burned very slowly, but produced several cubic meters of smoke each. He'd only need the one for the exam. Start. President Mick's voice rang out. Without bothering to look at his competitors, Izuku ran into the city, puffing large amounts of thick black smoke. What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in real battles. Izuku turned a corner and came face to face with a two-pointer. He ran forwards, his hands held out in front of him, gathering a fist-sized clump of black smoke. Compress. Flatten. The small cloud got thinner and thinner until Izuku could only see a 2D circle of solid black suspended between his open palms. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of his neck as he sent it forwards at high speed. Monomolecular blade. The two-pointer's head fell to the ground with a dull clang, and Izuku continued onwards. Not a great batch this year. Samantha spoke. It is a shame. Quite a few are getting very high scores, but their records are far from perfect. There's also been a lot of fighting amongst competitors over single robots. Nezu said. Arrogance. They've been told all their lives that they're amazing, or the best. This is the result. Is that kid smoking? Aizawa's eyes opened in moderate surprise. Did he just hear that right? There was a kid smoking during the exam. Ah, yes. Those are not actual cigarettes, they're specially made to contain no addictive substances and produce large volumes of thick smoke. Mr. Midoriya's quirk is a rather weak smoke control, although judging from the state of the robots he leaves behind, he's trained it far beyond what was originally thought possible. Nezu's voice observed. I get the need for support equipment, but… cigarettes. Midnight voiced again. It's clever. Aizawa spoke up. It's alive. Mick exclaimed playfully. The dark-haired man sighed, sitting up properly. The first thing that came to your mind wasn't oh, he's using support equipment. It was oh, he's smoking. Any villain that sees that is going to make the same observation. He probably can't create smoke himself if he's using those, but you'd never know that without being told. What degree has he improved his quirk to? Aizawa asked. He went from controlling fist-sized amounts of smoke at 5 years old to his entire body's area at 14. His fine control is so perfect that he's creating monomolecular, or thereabouts, blades with impressively low effort. It was apparently believed previously that he'd only ever double the amount controlled. As you can see, that is certainly not the case. Nezu responded. That's actually pretty impressive. Mick said. Smart, strong, a hard worker. I can tell we'll get along handsomely. He is just adorable too. Midnight cooed. Aizawa rolled his eyes. So, we've got one golden child by our own standards and 300 more of their own standards. Is he going to pass? He asked. Nezu shrugged minutely. It's difficult to say. His villain points, while not the lowest, aren't in the top 20. He is doing quite well with rescue points though. Ah, I just assumed we were having a single heroics class again this year. I think it would be for the best that we let Aizawa purge them. He said. Vlad King nodded, while Aizawa just sighed, taking a full of coffee. Fine by me. Vlad said. I'll deal with the arrogant brats. Don't expect any first years by the end of orientation. I'll find an excuse. Izuku cut his 21st robot's head off, lowering his hands with a huff. That put him at a decent 43 points. Not as high as he would like, but a reasonable number nonetheless. There were still 3 minutes of the exam, plenty of time to find more robots and… There was an explosion in the next street over. The cacophony of noise caused by examinees demolishing robots ceased and was replaced by a series of loud thuds and cries of shock. Izuku darted out into the main road, all thoughts of finding rogue robots gone as he stared up at the biggest robot he'd ever seen in his life. Not that he'd seen many robots in his life, but this one was skyscraper-sized. Most of the other teenagers were either running for their lives or just standing stationary, staring in awe up at the huge robot about to crush them. Quite a few were stuck in place due to scrap metal or debris blocking their path. One boy was even pinned to the tarmac. Izuku sprang into action. Izuku trembled as he walked up to the classroom door. Two of his classmates had also made it into the UA Hero course. Their quirks were strong, and they were quite skilled with them, so it wasn't surprising that they'd made it. What was surprising was Izuku earning the highest score. His villain points wouldn't have been nearly enough on their own to even get admitted to the course, but his rescue point count had been overwhelmingly large, to the point that he would have earned a place without villain points. Suffice to say, the 2-star students were not happy about the underdog success. Izuku clenched his fist and took a breath, opening the door and stepping through. It was utter pandemonium. Students were using their quirks, jumping around the room on the desks, and being generally rowdy. And there was a caterpillar man staring at him from the corner of the room. They locked eyes for a moment. Izuku just kept his head down and snuck across the room to his desk at the front. It didn't work. A familiar voice called out from the desk behind Izuku's and was quickly joined by the one beside it. Deku. Must be pretty relieved you made the cut, huh? I bet he cheated his way in. What did you? 5 minutes. The caterpillar man said. I've been here 5 minutes and only one of you noticed me. Disappointing. Put your PE uniforms on and get outside. You have 5 minutes. Aizawa combed a hand through his hair, looking towards the main building. He already had excuses for 13 out of the 19 he wanted to expel. 2 for bullying, 6 for using their quirks as they pleased in the classroom, and 5 for misconduct, which was code for horsing about in my classroom. He was surprised when Midoriya noticed him in the classroom. He was once again pleasantly surprised when Midoriya was the first one out onto the field. He had a determined look on his face, which Aizawa smirked internally at. Good. His apprehension test ruse should work wonderfully here. Aizawa was praising God internally when 3 of the remaining 6 students to have an excuse for were late. The majority of the class were late, but that was just ticking more boxes for their expulsion form. You'll be doing a quirk apprehension test. Eraserhead said, his sadistic leer hidden beneath his capture weapon. Whoever comes in last place will be expelled. Izuku had already smoked after he left the changing room. He'd kept the smoke in his lungs, ready to breathe out and use at a moment's notice. The first test was a 50-meter dash. Izuku inverted his monomolecular blade so that rather than cutting, he was able to push off the almost completely solid mass with his right foot, giving him a good start. The second test was grip strength. Izuku used the same method as before in combination with his own physical strength to achieve a much better score than he would have otherwise. The endurance run, standing long jump, sit-ups and sideways steps went by pretty normally. He didn't have good enough control to use his quirk in those tests. The ball throw went very well. Izuku tossed the ball into a thick black cloud of smoke which became somewhat solid and carried the ball off into the distance. It was a struggle to maintain the solid state for longer than just a few seconds, but he got it a good 2,300 meters before he lost control and dropped it. Once his classmates had their throws, Aizawa called the students over to give them their scores. Izuku's gaze moved down the hologram until he locked onto his own name. 19th place. He'd just barely beaten the person in last, who he didn't know. It was only a matter of tens of points, which was very, very close. He'd need to work hard to ensure he didn't cut it so close again. Then, Aizawa surprised him. All of you can go pack your bags and leave. You're expelled from the hero course. He said, ignoring the cries of outrage. You can try to get transferred to Gen Ed, but it's not likely to happen. I want you all off campus in 5 minutes. The consequences of being late this time will be worse than expulsion. Midoriya, stay behind. After a few seconds of loud protests from the ex-students, Aizawa glanced down at his wrist. 4 minutes 36 until I can legally arrest you all for trespassing. Then you'll never become a hero at any hero school. They cleared out pretty quickly after that. The moment they were out of sight, the hero turned to Izuku. You're not expelled. You're the only one who actually put any effort into the test whatsoever. Go and get changed back into your uniform. Your syllabus is on my desk. He said. Izuku stared at the hero for a moment before speaking up. But, why me? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Why you, what? Izuku tilted his head, thinking over his words. Why keep just me in the course? Some of their quirks were amazing, and if they passed the exams then they must be skilled with them. Laziness. Aizawa began. Arrogance. Pride. Yes, their quirks were powerful. But it's because they were born with quirks so powerful already that they're not fit for the hero course. They didn't bother to train or improve their quirks. The moment they got to the level that made them top dog in junior school, they stopped trying to improve and instead maintained that level. Izuku nodded hesitantly, understanding the man's point. But, just because they're a little arrogant doesn't mean they can't become a hero. Let's put it this way. Each and every one of your classmates were given swords, spears and shields at birth. You were given a rock. They were happy with their swords and didn't bother trying to use them to forge something better. You on the other hand, took that rock and chipped away at it, somehow forging Excalibur. Izuku was stunned. Aizawa gave a small grin. I've seen your file, kid. All of the staff has. What you've done with your quirk. It's impressed every hero currently in that building. He pointed at the main UA building. You're almost pro material already. You created a monomolecular blade from scratch using a smoke control quirk. From the way you kicked off the smoke during the 50-meter dash and carried the ball a minute ago, I can tell you just figured out how to solidify smoke on the fly for a single stupid test. Your classmates just used their quirks the same way they've always used them during that test. You pretty much just reinvented your own quirk to suit your needs. That is what we look for in potential heroes. Aizawa patted Izuku's shoulder as he passed. See you tomorrow, kid. Make sure you get your syllabus, but you're free to go. Have a long nap, we're going to be sharpening Excalibur all morning. It's going to be hell. The hero didn't need to hide his grin at the enthusiastic yes sir. As he walked away. So Eraser. Midnight said. Got any students left for me to teach art to? Just the one. Aizawa yawned, pulling his sleeping bag out from under his desk. Midoriya. I managed to expel the other 19 before the end of the apprehension test. Cementus grumbled, handing 100 yen over to Present Mick. Great. Midnight squealed. Teaching one-on-one is much better than a class full of kids. I can tailor the lesson plan to his progress specifically. Oh, this is amazing. Aizawa rolled his eyes, laying back under his desk and snuggling into the yellow bag. That kid would make a great hero. He'd make sure of it. Izuku stepped into homeroom and stopped, staring at the single desk right in front of the teacher's one. He stepped forwards and sat down, looking around the barren classroom in slight disbelief. It still hadn't quite hit him that he'd survived Mr. Aizawa's purge. The moment the bell rang, Mr. Aizawa rolled out from under the teacher's desk in his caterpillar form. Midoriya. Get changed into your PE clothes and meet me in training hall C. It's the second one to the left of the main stairs. Hall A was closed by the third years, he said whilst emerging from his chrysalis as a scruffy middle-aged man. Izuku looked around training hall C. There were weights and secured bars around the room and several dark blue mats arranged in the middle of the floor space. Mr. Aizawa was standing beside them with a large bundle of something on the floor. Midoriya. Over here. You're going to be working on solidifying your smoke constructs. I understand that you can create shapes and mimic objects' appearances. He said. Yes, sir. It's easy to shape the smoke, but the more complex the design or the more objects there are, the more difficult it is to solidify. Izuku replied. Aizawa nodded in understanding. That's why you used your quirk for the ball throw and the grip test, but not the sideways steps. Alright, you need to work on consistently solidifying one shape to a decent degree. Once you finish that, you'll move on to 2 objects at once and so on. Then we'll move on to more complex shapes. Izuku pulled out a cigarette and lit it, taking a few quick puffs to get the smoke in the air, before leaving it wedged in the corner of his mouth. Aizawa pulled a long stick out of the bundle at his feet, holding it out towards Izuku. It looked like a fencipist without the sharp end to stick into the ground. Focus on singular walls for now. Just block my attack. Don't damage the stick. Got it? He asked. Izuku nodded, raising his hands and forming a thick wall between himself and Aizawa. Thinner. 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 Mr. Aizawa thrust the wooden post forwards, smashing through the thick wall with the sound of shattering glass. The chunks of smoke dissolved back into wispy clouds. A good first attempt. Try again. Too thick and the entire structure is too weak. Too thin and there isn't any weight behind the wall. Izuku tried again. And again. And again. Every time Mr. Aizawa smashed through the wall like it was nothing. They spent hours in the training room, doing that one thing over and over again. Eventually, Aizawa called the end of the session. Alright, you've got English in 30 minutes. Take a shower, get something to eat and head back to the classroom. You did well today. Izuku sighed. Did well? Every wall I put up got taken down in one hit by you. He said dejectedly. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Didn't ever learn how to not burn his opponents to death in a matter of hours? He asked. The greenette shook his head, picking up his bag. Exactly. Skip homeroom tomorrow and come straight here once you're in your gym clothes. We'll get an extra half hour that way. Aizawa called as Izuku left. He glanced down at the tablet in his hands. First hit. 24.5 N. Final hit. 562.9 N. Aizawa grinned. You'll be stopping full-strength punches with those walls this time next week. We'll be moving on to complex shapes sooner than I'd thought. UA's curriculum was quite fun. The subjects were enjoyable, and the teachers, who were all pro heroes, were all awesome. Apart from Aizawa's hell training. Every day, without fail, Izuku met him in one of the training halls, or testing grounds. They do some basic exercises, a lap or two around the main building, lift weights for maybe half an hour, then do hellish quirk training for several hours before English. They would do the same thing, day after day, hours on end. Izuku would put up a wall, and Aizawa would smash it down. Until one day, he brought in a robot. "Sir. Why is there a robot here?" Izuku asked. "Put up a shield between us and the robot, and I'll show you," Aizawa said, hefting the wooden pole with a scuffed up end. Izuku put up a wall before glancing expectantly at his homeroom teacher. Aizawa just held the post like a bat and swung at the wall. To Izuku's shock, it bounced right off. "I don't possess the strength to break through your smoke walls anymore," he said simply. Izuku stared at the intact wall of black. He turned and stared at Aizawa. He turned back to the wall. "What?" he croaked. The hero seemed smug. "Oh, didn't I tell you? I've been putting more and more strength into my attacks every session. Because you kept failing, you worked harder than the day before to do it right. Congratulations, you've created a near impenetrable shield. So long as your opponent doesn't have a strength quirk, or is a massive bodybuilder, or is just really determined, or has some kind of gas quirk like midnight. Let's get started." From then on, the hell training somehow got harder. More exercises in the morning, heavier weights, stronger robots, longer runs, increasing the total volume of smoke under his control. Izuku was loving it. The robot smashed through Izuku's smoke wall yet again, scattering the black wisps of smoke everywhere. The greenette sighed, accepting the offered water bottle from Aizawa. "There's something I'm missing. You shouldn't just be able to smash through solid objects like that. Once I figure out what I'm doing wrong, I should be able to stop any attack with little effort," he muttered. "We have to pack up for now. Today you'll be having your first, actual, heroics lesson. Get your costume on and head out to the bus bay. We're going to a special facility for rescue training." The greenette sighed and got to his feet. "Alright. I'll think on it when I get home," he said. Izuku's costume was quite simple. A dark green, almost black jumpsuit with small black exhaust ports at various places around his body. Cheekbones, shoulders, heels, elbows, shoulder blades and knees. They were so that he could release smoke all around himself at once for maximum effect. It was especially useful now that he could create punch-resistant shields with a single thought. Theoretically he could also stop bullets, but he wasn't keen on finding out. Until he figured out what he was missing. He had a black utility belt with 2 emergency medical kits, a few rolls of capture tape, some cigarettes and other useful knickknacks. He also had a mask, which was where the exhausts were all connected to. It was a plain rebreather that covered his mouth and nose, which could hang around his neck if he wanted. Izuku met Aizawa outside, where they boarded the bus and spent 15 minutes driving to the special rescue training facility. The greenette followed Aizawa off of the bus, where they met the rescue hero 13 outside a large dome. "Good morning, Mr. Midoriya. I've been hearing some good things about you from my colleagues. Welcome to the USJ, a facility I have designed to simulate the most common disasters a hero will eventually face. Please come inside," the hero exclaimed. The 2 heroes and 1 student entered the facility and stopped at the top of the large staircase leading to the central plaza below. Izuku looked around the large dome and barely contained awe. There was a lake, a mountain, a pair of separate domes altogether covered in painted-on flames and blue waves, a crumbling city and a rocky outcrop. Floods, fires, storms, landslides and earthquakes. These are just some of the scenarios you will come across in your career. I'm sure Eraserhead here has been teaching you how to wield your quirk offensively. Well, with me you will learn how to use your quirk to save people from disasters such as these. Follow me," 13 exclaimed. They went down the stairs and headed to the crumbling cityscape. They moved to the center of the zone, where there was an intersection with roads leading off in several directions. "Welcome to the earthquake zone. Possibly the most common disaster you will come across, an earthquake in or around a populated area. Now, these buildings are made to be unstable, so we will need to be cautious, however most of them can only collapse if triggered by the facility's main computer." Izuku followed 13 into the nearest building, Aizawa right behind him. The rescue hero led them upstairs to an open room with large cracks running along the floor, walls and ceiling. On the other side of the room was a training dummy slumped against the wall. "You see the cracks around the room? Unless you can fly, it's too dangerous to try to rescue the civilian in this situation. You need the floor to be supported from underneath, or the cracks to be fixed by someone with a specialist quirk. So long as you wait and don't disturb the building, the civilian will be safe until you can rescue them without worry. A body at rest will remain at rest until acted upon by an external force. Newton's first law of motion," Izuku said. 13 gave a thumbs up, the wide eyes on her spacesuit narrowing, as though she were smiling. "Exactly. Now, if we head downstairs I can show you how to." Izuku wasn't listening. Newton's laws were spinning around in his head. Specifically, the third one. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. A light bulb went off in Izuku's brain. My quirk negates Newton's third law. That's why the robot can punch through my smoke so easily. I figured it out. He murmured. Izawa raised an eyebrow. Figured what out, problem child? He asked. Izuku couldn't see it, but the man was smiling. My quirk. It negates Newton's third law of motion. That's why you and the robot could smash through my solidified smoke so easily. You didn't receive an equal amount of force in return. My general strength with my quirk has been getting stronger, that's why you've needed more force every time to break the walls. But if I were to mimic the effects of Newton's third law with my quirk. Izuku pressed a button on his suit, letting the smoke contained there jettison out through the exhaust pipes. The smoke moved around the room, permeating the cracks in the walls, floor and ceiling. With a single thought, the smoke hardened, securing the room perfectly. He didn't need to focus on shaping the smoke, the contours of the cracks did that for him. Slowly and carefully, Izuku walked across the room, picked up the dummy, and brought it back to the two heroes. Izawa was grinning. Congratulations, kid. You've just graduated to shape training. The rest of the lesson with 13 was very informative. The hero enthusiastically taught him what to look for in unstable infrastructure, how to tell if something was load-bearing, and other useful tips about rescue work in an unstable building. Izuku would have one rescue lesson a week, moving to a new zone in a repeating loop, completing mock rescue missions that became gradually more and more complex and risky. In the meantime, the training sessions with Izawa had gotten harder. The sports festival was coming soon, and the man was working the teenager to the bone. He might have figured out how to make borderline indestructible 2D shields, but he couldn't do anything more than that. Simple spheres turned out lumpy, cubes were misshapen and rounded, and the less said about Izuku's pyramids the better. Working in 3 dimensions was hard, and there was no missing law of physics to provide a shortcut this time. Practice was the only way. He could create the shapes just fine with smoke, it's just the moment he tried to solidify them he lost control over some part of it and it came out all wonky. On top of creating 3D structures, body training and classwork, Izawa was also teaching Izuku basic hand-to-hand. How to throw a punch, how to take a punch, how to plant your feet so a gust of wind didn't blow you over. Izuku learned that Thursday that his little session of online martial arts learning was woefully inadequate. He was starting to appreciate the taste of fresh air, the few times he wasn't eating sweaty training mat. He was getting better though. His shapes were less lumpy, although as fragile as his walls used to be. He was fitter and had put on a decent amount of muscle. His hand-to-hand, while still terrible, was probably better than most first years. Izuku, Izawa found, was a very quick learner. Then, the day of the festival arrived. Izuku patted his pocket, checking for the 10th time that his cigarettes were there. The crowd in the stadium above roared. Is everybody ready? President Mick's voice screamed. The audience yelled back a giant yes. Izuku stood up and left the waiting room, checking again that his lighter was with his cigarettes. Then let's get started. First, we have the sole student of the hero course, the survivor of the Class 1A purge, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku walked out into the stadium alone, looking around at the large circular arena. The audience seemed a little confused as to why there was only one hero course student, but they cheered nonetheless. Next. We have the general studies classes 1C, 1D and 1E. Keep your eyes on them people, they're gunning for the hero course. Once again, the crowd roared. After them we have the support course classes 1F and 1H. Investors, these are your future moneymakers. Heroes, your best friends. It was mainly the heroes that cheered, alongside a few of the bigger support companies' representatives. Classes 1I and 1J won't be participating. They are of course the business classes. They have decided to remain in the stands to observe and market the heroes of our future. Now, Cementus, take the stage. President Mick exclaimed. The cuboid literature teacher walked up to the concrete stage in the middle of the arena. He was a very soft-spoken man, so Izuku found it surprising that he was hosting the first year's festival this year. Good morning everybody. Would Izuku Midoriya please come up and give the first year representative speech? He said softly into the microphone. Izuku stepped up to the stage and stopped behind the microphone. I'd like to wish my fellow first years the best of luck. My classmates were expelled because they did not act in a way befitting of a hero. I hope the general education students aiming for the hero course can do better. Plus ultra. He said. Cementus spoke once again as Izuku returned to his place. Thank you Midoriya. Now, let us see what the first event will be. The large wheel appeared on the screen above the announcer's booth where President Mick was sitting. It began spinning around and around until it slowed and stopped on. It seems the first event will be a game of hide and seek tag. Here are the rules. One of our esteemed staff members will be it. They will not use their quirk, but can use any support equipment to aid them in following after the students. The students meanwhile, must run and hide within the building. They cannot leave the building and hide on the grounds around the arena, but all areas are fair game to hide in. The final 42 to be caught will move on to the next round. If any students are able to evade our staff member for longer than half an hour, then whoever is still in hiding will move on to the next round. The staff member hunting the students will have a body cam in the interest of fairness. It will be displayed on the screen above. Now, if our member of staff would step forward. Izuku watched as Mr. Izawa walked out of the tunnel on the other side of the arena and climbed up on stage. They locked eyes, and Izawa smiled. "Oh, we are so fucked," Izuku whispered. The moment the buzzer rang, Izuku turned and ran back into the tunnel he'd walked out of moments earlier. The students had a 30-second head start, which Izuku planned to use. He sprinted down corridors and up staircases, furiously smoking the whole way. Izuku ducked through a doorway, inhaling the smoke haloed around him and condensing it in his lungs. He tossed a cigarette butt into a nearby bin and entered the stands huffing and puffing. The audience members in the section he was in glanced at him for a moment before turning back to Izawa and Cementus below. The second buzzer went, and Izawa ran across the arena and into the tunnel most of the first years had ran through. Izuku walked calmly to the railing at the front of the stands, leaning there for a second and watching the tunnel. When Izawa didn't suddenly reappear, Izuku breathed out a torrent of smoke, creating a solid platform on the other side of the railing. He jumped the metal bars and landed on his flat construction, which rose up to the top of the stadium and let him step onto the roof of the arena. He sat down cross-legged and watched as Izawa prowled the stadium, looking through bathrooms and waiting rooms, the audience's stands and the student ones. One Gen Ed kid got caught in present mix booth behind the door. He used his capture weapon to ensnare students and propel himself around the building. There's only one student left now, folks, and 3 minutes left on the clock. Wherever could our first-year hero student be hiding? Present Mick asked as Izawa caught a support girl sitting amongst the crowd wearing a poncho. Izuku had relaxed slightly until Izawa used his capture weapon to pull himself onto the stadium roof. "Problem child. Mr. Izawa. Took you a while to get here," Izuku said, grinning at his homeroom teacher. The man just smiled, his capture weapon already sailing towards his only student. Izuku breathed out a sizable amount of smoke, not bothering to alter its shape and hardening it instantly, blocking the capture scarf. Undeterred, the hero reeled in his scarf and ran towards his student. Izuku let out all of the smoke in his lungs, forming a wall several meters tall and the width of the roof across. He left a thin opening at eye level so he could keep an eye on Izawa. The man kicked the wall with all his might, but it remained unwieldy. "You've really improved the last month, kid. Nothing short of All Might himself could get through this wall. Good job. I accept your surrender," Izuku called through the small gap. "I didn't say I was giving up," Eraserhead called, jumping off of the roof and swinging below, coming back up on the other side of the wall. Izuku jumped back, dodging the hero's capture weapon again and ensnaring it in formless smoke, solidifying it around the tool. Izawa just drew his knife and cut away the length of capture weapon ensnared in smoke. By the time he turned to where Izuku had ran, there was a large black cloud swirling on the roof, obscuring his vision. The final buzzer went off, signifying the end of the event. The audience cheered. And that, folks, is the end of the first event. Izuku Midoriya is once again the sole survivor of Eraserhead's purge and will be moving on to the next event. Meanwhile, Present Mick screeched. Izawa walked to where the vortex of black was vanishing and came upon Izuku, inhaling the smoke back into his body. "Good job, kid. Looks like I'll have to increase the intensity of your training again." The greenette sagged mockingly, walking over to meet the hero. "Sorry about your capture weapon. I didn't think you'd actually cut it. So that's what that massive knife is for." Izawa snorted. "It's fine, problem child, I've got spares. Besides, it's made to be chopped up like that. The pieces can be repaired good as new in a matter of hours." They reached the edge of the rooftop. "I don't have a way down," his homeroom teacher admitted. Izuku let out a snort of smoke, making a wide platform from it. Big Bad Eraserhead, defeated by a small drop. Izawa nudged the teen playfully, making him lean towards the edge. "I'll show you a short drop." After a short break, the 42 students who passed were assembled back in the middle of the arena, waiting for Cementus to announce the second event. The second event will be Team Dodgeball. The students will be split into 2 teams. Which team you're on has already been chosen and will be announced in a minute. Every student has been assigned a point value, determined by the order in which you were caught by Eraserhead in the last round. If you hit the person in 42nd place with a ball, you earn 5 points. If the person in 42nd place catches a ball, they deduct 5 points from the opponent's score. Everyone's score goes up in increments of 5 until first place, who is worth 10,000 points. Everyone's gaze immediately locked on to Izuku. The teams are as follows. Inko was having a good day. So far she'd only cried twice because of her baby being on the TV and he hadn't gotten hurt yet. She was just so proud of Izuku. The other children had always made fun of him for his weak quirk, and the doctor had said his quirk probably wouldn't get much stronger than it had been. But just look at him. He was flying around the stadium, making solid walls out of smoke, and fighting a pro hero confidently. Inko looked down at her phone as it buzzed. Inko. We should really change these names. Bitsuki. Where's the fun in that? Bitsuki. Your boy's doing well, Inko. The brat could learn a thing or two from him, I'll bet. Inko. Izuku's doing so well, I'm so proud. Bitsuki. He sure showed those little brats, didn't he? Bitsuki. But just look at that control. He's turning smoke into solid objects. How good do you have to be to even think of doing that? Inko. I think Mr. Eraserhead is his homeroom teacher. He's been tutoring Izuku one-on-one to improve his quirk and do fitness exercises. Bitsuki. I thought they were familiar with each other when they fought on the roof. Inko. The second event is starting. Bitsuki. Man, they're all gonna be gunning for him now, huh? Inko. Izuku. Bitsuki. Holy shit, you go kid. Izuku stood with a ball in hand, his gaze focused on the opposite team. Most of them were glaring at him, hefting their dodgeballs threateningly. Every student had one dodgeball each, which meant there were 42 balls total in play. Izuku hadn't tried separating and controlling that many pieces of smoke at once, but he'd manage. The buzzer rang out, signaling the start of the game. Smoke billowed across the arena, filling up the dodgeballs through the whole air as normally pumped through. With a single thought, Izuku sent every ball in the arena towards the opposing team, the bright red balls bouncing off of the teenagers and straight back into the hands of his teammates. The spares remained floating in the air as Izuku grimaced, struggling to keep control of 42 objects at once. And Midoriya comes in with an instant attack, awarding his team 234 points in one move. Present Mick exclaimed. As his teammates threw more and more volleys at the opposing team, Izuku eventually had to let go of the smoke within the balls, as the sheer number of objects tired him out tremendously. The opposing team started returning fire, concentrating mainly on Izuku, who just gathered the smoke left around him and put up a wall. The balls just bounced harmlessly off. The second event went on for 15 minutes. The red team put up a good fight, but thanks to Izuku's initial attack, the green team came out on top. The final round of the sports festival was always a tournament. Miro hadn't done so well in the tournament last year, but he was confident that this time he wouldn't end up naked on live TV. Tamaki didn't even make it last year because he wasn't aggressive enough to make it through the second event. Najira beat her first opponent, but lost to her second one. She'd improved the second best of the three of them, next to Miro's control problem. The 3 second years were watching the first year tournament. They'd been surprised to find that there was only a single kid in the first year hero course. They'd been surprised again when he'd managed to fend off Mr. Izawa with almost casual ease. Admittedly, the man couldn't use his quirk, but just by changing up his strategy a little, the first year could easily take down the experienced pro with little effort. His quirk isn't a strong one either. Miro said. It's like mine. He's made it strong. I mean, just look at what he's doing. He's making solid objects out of smoke. The amount of training he's gone through to get to that point. Tamaki remained silent, but stared at the 2 first years fighting below with interest. Midoriya was using smoke to blind his opponent to get behind him. Eventually, the green-haired boy tossed the general education boy out of bounds. It's unrefined. He's not using it to just push his opponents out of bounds, it's too unstable to attempt that. Or maybe he's too tired at this point. He can't concentrate enough to do it. The boy said quietly. He's not producing the smoke either. Where do you think he's getting it from? Does he smoke? What kind of shapes do you think he can make? How can you tell he's not producing it? Miro asked, his gaze focused on the boy in the stands below them. After every event he's breathed the smoke back in. He never lets it drift away if he can help it. So he can't produce it himself, or it takes a lot of effort to. And he can breathe it in like normal air. Miro mused. I wonder if he'd be down to spar sometime. The tournament was going well so far. Izuku had exhausted more than half of the smoke in his lungs, but there were only 2 matches left. Both against Gen Ed students trying for the hero course. One had some kind of hot hands quirk, while the other 2 he didn't know. He was fighting hot hands first. His match was on next, so he left the empty Class 1A seating area and walked into the waiting room, where he lit his second cigarette of the day and took a long pull, blowing all of the smoke he had out to cover the room in a thin haze. He'd been holding it in his lungs most of the day. Even though he could breathe the stuff just fine, it was nice to let it out for however short a time he had. When he heard the summons to the arena, he inhaled all of the smoke and put out his cigarette, tossing it into the bin beside the door. Izuku walked into the arena and up onto the concrete platform that served as a fighting ring. On one side we have Tetsubata Shota of Class 1D. On the other we have Midoriya Izuku of Class 1A. Will the fiery fist defeat the smoky Smurfmouth? It could go either way. Izuku bowed to his opponent, who seemed nervous. They'd both made it this far, but Izuku was the sole member of the hero course. He wasn't expected to lose. Begin. Samantha said quietly. Izuku sprang into action, sprinting at his opponent as he blew out a small stream of smoke, the dark clouds surrounding Izuku like the rings of Saturn. Tetsuwada raised his arms in a defensive stance, his feet sliding into a steady base. He knew some martial arts then. Or at least knew how to fight properly. Izuku sent a ball of smoke at the boy, expecting him to move away. He actually ducked, which was better for Izuku as it didn't change the distance between them. Izuku's fist met Tetsuwada's forearm. The other boy tried to get a hold of Izuku, but the greenette twisted away, blowing a gust of smoke into the other boy's face. He closed his eyes and coughed, putting his hands over his face. Izuku grabbed the other boy by the arm and kicked his feet out from under him, tossing him to the ground and straddling his back, pinning the boy's arms to his sides. Tetsuwada is unable to move. Midoriya moves on to the finals. Izuku stepped up to the concrete ring for the final match. This is it, folks. The moment we've all been waiting for. Midoriya Izuku vs Akane Mitsuha. Are you ready? Akane gave Izuku a curt nod, which he returned. Stared. Izuku let out a long puff of smoke. Akane hadn't actually used her quirk yet, or at least hadn't used it in a way that Izuku could see. The girl pulled her arm back as though she was going to punch. Some kind of strength-based quirk. Was she going to kick up a strong wind like All Might? Her fist came flying towards him at high speed. Izuku dodged. Okay, spring-loaded fists and stretchy arms. So she hadn't used a reflex quirk or something during her other fights, she was just that good. Izuku tried to ward her off with smoke walls, but her fists were too fast and got through the smoke before he hardened it. The wrists would then stretch from where she was stuck to the wall and punch him. After a few minutes Izuku decided that close range was his only option. He couldn't mess with her arms, as he hadn't found the limit to what they could stretch, so it was risky. Remaining at range just gave her the advantage. In the end it would come down to who was better with hand-to-hand and how sneaky Izuku was with his quirk. It was over in a matter of seconds. The arena was cloaked in dark smoke, obscuring everybody's vision. Akane swung wildly, expecting a sneak attack. A figure emerged from the dark only to dissipate when in contact with her fists. The smoke solidified around her arms, crawling up to her shoulders and halting there. Akane sighed as the smoke swirled around her. I give. She said. I can't move my arms. Akane Mitsuha surrenders. Izuku Midoriya wins the sports festival. Present Mix screams. Izuku sat at his desk, the golden medal still hanging from his throat. Mr. Aizawa entered moments later, smiling at the teen. Well done, kid. I'm impressed, you actually held me off until time was up. Izuku beamed. Looks like I can't go easy on you anymore. The sadistic slave driver grinned. Izuku smiled right back. I look forward to it. Aizawa looked down at the papers on his desk a moment. Normally I'd give the class these the day after the festival, but so many offers have been coming in, I think it would be best to get a head start. Here. He said, handing a large pile of papers to Izuku. These are the hero agencies that have requested you for a work study. They're in order of rating, so I'm sure if there's one you want specifically you can find it easily enough. There are more coming in almost constantly, but the bigger ones have already made their offers. Izuku flicked through a few pages before looking back up at his teacher. How many are there? In that pile? 5,286. But there were more coming in even as I was printing those off, so there are more now. Look at the bottom page. As always said. Izuku picked up a stack of papers and turned them over, setting them on the desk and taking the one on top. There was a single hero name at the top of the page. I would be honored. Izuku said with a mock bow. Eraserhead rolled his eyes. Your sleep schedule is going to curl up and die. Are you sure? There are other options. It's the best option. Izuku said confidently. I'm already familiar with you and your teaching style. You know my strengths and weaknesses well. It'll get a lot of awkward introductions and explanations out of the way. Plus, you're a good hero. You're efficient, and that's exactly what I need to be, with a quirk like mine. Aizawa smirked. Good answer. You won't be needing those then. Go home, rest and be here in the morning. You'll be picking your hero name tomorrow, so. The smoke hero. Wisp. Izuku cut in. Aizawa grinned. Well, Midnight's not going to be happy, but whatever. Just means we can get more training done. Your hand-to-hand against Akane and the other Gen Ed kids was abysmal. I'll need to beat you into shape before we go out on patrol. True to his word, Aizawa did in fact improve Izuku's hand-to-hand in the short time they had. Izuku was also finally able to solidify and retain a 3D shape. Granted, it was a sphere, the easiest of the three he was tasked with, it was kind of fragile, it was slightly lumpy in one area, and it almost gave Izuku an aneurysm creating it, but it was progress. A week after the events of the sports festival, Izuku and Izawa went out on their first patrol together. The way daylight heroics worked was widely known, as civilians were always present at a villain fight. Underground heroics weren't known at all, other than by the criminals and victims present when an underground hero appeared. Izawa used the quiet hours between incidents to teach Izuku how to land quietly, how to blend into the shadows, what made a good perch and what didn't, how to tail someone without their knowledge, and what to look for in suspicious or guilty passerby. If someone walked without fear down an alleyway at night, they were either stupid or had something to defend themselves and knew how to use it. They were most likely a gang member or a criminal involved with an organization. Fighting random street thugs was good practice, as fighting the same person all the time would give Izuku bad habits. And so the new schedule for the week was created. Wake up at 6, do morning training, have breakfast, do homework, paperwork from the patrol the night before, go to school, do quirk and weight training, spar, learn about paperwork and different daylight heroics from the UA staff, well as always sleeps, go home at 4, sleep until 6, have dinner, go on patrol until 2, sleep until 6, repeat. Fortunately, patrols were rather quiet, only the occasional petty thief or drug deal to catch and break up. Eraserhead told Izuku that was pretty normal, so he didn't question the lack of activity. It's usually Saturdays when the big stuff goes down. They all have time off whatever low-paying jobs they have and can gather together to do something big, like a territory dispute. That's really the biggest thing that happens frequently around here anyway. Wisp was perched on the rooftop beside Eraserhead. They were just sitting on the edge, keeping vigilant but remaining relaxed. There was a loud yell several alleyways away and a crash of something meeting a wall. Wisp glanced at Eraserhead, who nodded. Go. I'll catch up. Without waiting another second, the exhausts in Wisp's heels jettisoned a small cloud of smoke which compressed and compacted as the underground hero and his student ran across the rooftop, jumping off of the edge. Eraserhead's scarf latched onto the fire escape and he reeled himself onto the opposite roof. Wisp double jumped off of his smoke, landing on the opposite roof and running towards the shouting. It was an improved version of what he used the sports festival to get onto the stadium roof. It was much more stable and able to propel Wisp forwards when he pushed off of it by letting the condensed smoke explode outwards. He called it a smoke grenade. Wisp practically flew through the air, leaping off of rooftops far ahead of Eraserhead, quickly arriving at the scene. There was a person with an exposed brain pummeling a rather burly-looking man. The brain guy's eyes were off. They weren't focusing on their target, instead rolling around vacantly. There was a wall of purple mist behind the burly man, which the creature was obviously trying to push him into. The man wasn't even budging though. Actually, looking closer, the monster's punches weren't even phasing him. 4. Wisp dropped from the roof, landing behind the brain creature. The torrent of smoke surrounds the creature and the man, forming a solid shield between them. That's enough. Wisp orders. The creature turned, a gasping, gargling screech tearing from its throat before it ran at the smoke wall, smashing through it with ease and running through the purple mist. The moment the creature went through it, the mist condensed into nothing, leaving no trace behind. The hero in training turned to the civilian. Eraserhead arrived 6 seconds after Wisp. Are you alright, sir? Wisp asked. The burly man nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. My quirk absorbed the impact of that thing's punches. I'm just glad someone heard my shouting, I would have hit my limit sooner or later. He replied. What exactly happened? Eraserhead asked. The man shrugged. Nothing much to tell really. I was walking along when this purple portal spits out that brain monster in front of me. It was strong, like someone with a strength quirk. I know what that kinda punch feels like. Anyway, the little guy here shows up behind it and puts up a wall. The moment it sees him, the monster runs back to the portal. Eraserhead turned to Wisp. I used a full strength shield. It didn't hit the smoke, it just ran through it like it wasn't even there, he said. Eraserhead frowned. Wisp's walls wouldn't stop All Might or some stronger heroes, but they would be able to stop almost anything else. The fact the brain creature just walked through one was worrying. Once the police questioned the man and took the hero's statements, Wisp and Eraserhead left the scene, heading back to UA. Izuku stumbled into homeroom, still a little tired from patrol the night before. It wasn't as eventful as a few nights ago, but he was still up until 2 AM running around on the rooftops. Mr. Izawa greeted him from his desk as Izuku slumped down at his own. The coffee should kick in a minute or two, the hero said, placing a mug on Izuku's desk. My hero. Izuku said, tipping his head back and chugging the hot liquid. Your end-of-term exams are coming up soon. You have 2 weeks to prepare for both the written and the physical. I'll be upping your training in class and your sparring will be taken over by someone else. Depending on how that goes, your exam may be different. Izuku could hear the harder covered up by different. He was ready for the challenge. Once the coffee kicked in, Izuku and Izawa headed to Gym A, which had been recently repaired. They did the usual morning exercises, then quirk training for a few hours before getting food from the canteen. Put your costume on and head to practice facility 2. Aizawa said, standing from the table and throwing his jelly packet into the nearby bin. Izuku nodded, quickly finishing his katsudon and returning the bowl to lunch rush, praising his cooking once again. Once he had his costume on, Izuku walked over to practice facility 2, a cigarette already burning in his mouth. Knowing Aizawa, whoever was inside would attack on sight. Izuku surrounded himself in a vortex of smoke and knocked on the door. "Come in." A feminine voice chirped. Izuku opened the door and walked inside, looking around. Aizawa was in the corner in his sleeping bag, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. There was a pretty girl with periwinkle blue hair standing in the middle of the large room, wearing a skin-tight blue bodysuit. Probably her hero costume. That's why he was told to wear his then. A prevalent decoration on her costume were spirals. Her hair, her wrist guards, the pattern on her bodysuit. Something to do with her quirk. Beside the girl was a taller boy hunched over, making himself seem small. He had a white cloak, the hood pulled up to cover his face. He seemed to be trembling. Beneath the cloak the boy had rows and rows of pouches. An excessive amount. Unless he needed them. Ammunition. He'd only need one big pocket. Edible quirk triggers. Like the hero Fatgum. Both hero students seemed of similar age to Izuku, but they had to be upperclassmen. Second years then. Izuku froze. His smoke had moved without his input. Something was rising out of the ground directly behind him. Upper half of a humanoid figure. They were holding their breath, so it was just their presence and movements moving the smoke around. Male. Similar build to Izuku. Wearing a hero costume with a cape. Some kind of go-through-objects quirk. Goes through clothes too, that's why they were all wearing costumes. The figure extended their fist, but met a wall between them and Izuku in the smoke. There was a bang, a loud ouch. And the figure sank back into the ground. Izuku condensed the smoke around him into his costume's exhaust pipes. There wouldn't be a second attack. A muscular blonde boy popped out of the ground a few meters away, cradling his fist. Wow. Miro didn't even touch him. Did you see? Tamaki, did you see that? The girl exclaimed, shaking the cloaked boy. I want to go home. Tamaki said quietly. The blonde boy, Mirio, got to his feet and shook his hand one last time before turning to Izuku, a big smile on his face. Man, I got a bit too eager there. He exclaimed, putting his hands on his hips. I wasn't expecting you to notice me. How'd you do that? Izuku scratched the back of his neck. I can feel where the smoke I control is. By phasing out of the ground you displaced the smoke without my input. I could tell it was a person and not just the concrete being used like Cementus does it, because I can make out the outline of objects inside my smoke by sensing where my smoke is blocked by the object. He ended the explanation making it sound like a question. Mirio grinned. That's awesome. You've already trained your quirk far beyond what it was during the sports festival, and it's only been 2 weeks. He exclaimed. You watched the first year festival? Izuku asked. Of course. The girl exclaimed, bouncing forwards. We wanted to see the first year that survived Mr. Aizawa's purge. And you really didn't disappoint. What's your quirk called? How does it work? You held off Mr. Aizawa during the first event. That's super impressive. Have you fought him before? Did you win? Did you use your quirk or was it just hand to hand? Nijira slowed down, I'm sure he'll answer one a day. Mirio tried to stop the flow of questions, but Izuku just blinked for a second before answering. It's called smoke control. Basically I can control smoke. I have fought Mr. Aizawa before, he taught me how to fight because my schedule is so fluid and can line up with his cat naps. I haven't won yet, but I'm getting close, until of course he kicks into a higher gear again. We've fought with just hand to hand and just quirks, but mainly a combination of both. Does your quirk have something to do with spirals? It's probably an emitter, so some kind of energy manipulation that turns into spirals. Everyone stared at him a moment. Even Tamaki peered out from his hood and Aizawa's eyes opened. Nijira beamed, bouncing on the spot in excitement. Mirio just laughed heartily. Tamaki pulled his hood back down over his small smile. Aizawa shuddered and muttered something like, oh god, there's 2 of them. Before going back to sleep. My quirk is called Surge. It uses my stamina to create spiral energy blasts. I only use about 20% at a time because it uses so much stamina, but I've been getting better. I can even use my quirk to fly by shooting energy out of my feet. Nijira exclaimed, jumping and floating over to Izuku. Nobody's ever kept up with me before. It's great to meet you, Midoriya, right? I'm Nijira Hadu, but everyone calls me Nijira. It's also my hero name. Mirio walked over and gave Izuku a firm handshake. I'm Mirio Tagata, call me Mirio. My hero name's Lemillion because that's how many people I'm aiming to save. My quirk is permeation, and I can basically phase through anything," he said enthusiastically. Mirio gestured to Tamaki, who still had his hood over his face. "That's Tamaki Amajiki. His hero name is Suneater. His quirk's really cool, but he'll have to tell you that himself. He's being just a little chicken." Mirio guffawed at his own joke, while Najire just rolled her eyes with a smile. "Manifest," Tamaki said quietly, barely peeking out of his hood to speak to Izuku. "I can manifest the things I eat somewhere on my body. If I eat chicken, I can manifest wings." That was all he would say, and retreated back into his hood. Mirio clapped Izuku on the shoulder. "All four of us have an exam in 2 weeks, so we were hoping you would like to spar with us to prepare. It's totally cool if you say no though," he said. Izuku glanced between Mirio, Najire and Tamaki. "But why me? I mean, I'm just a first year. You're second years, I think, and have way more experience than I do. I won't even pose a challenge to you even if you're handicapped or something," he said. Mirio just grinned. "Go around with Najire. Quirks, martial arts, the works. First good hit wins. Make up your mind after that," he said. Izuku nodded hesitantly after turning to Najire, who seemed eager to fight. The greenet backed up a few meters, slipping his mask on and pulling his hood up, letting small wisps of smoke exit the exhaust pipes. Mirio and Tamaki were leaning against the wall beside Izawa, all three watching intently. "Ready?" Mirio asked. "Yeah. Yup. Start," Mirio called. Najire launched into the air, golden spirals whirling from her hands and feet zooming across the room towards Izuku. He let the girl get a little closer before pushing the smoke out in a huge explosion, engulfing most of the room. Najire stopped, then put her hands together, facing outwards. A second later a huge shockwave blew the smoke away from her. Izuku jumped from platform to platform, sailing through the air towards his opponent. Spotting him, Najire zoomed forwards, her hands outstretched again. Not wanting the shockwave from before to hit him, Izuku gathered the smoke around him and created a pair of strong walls stacked between Izuku and Najire. The shockwave shattered the first shield but dissipated upon hitting the second. Izuku blew up the smoke behind him, launching him at Najire, who was charging up a third shot. She was too slow. Najire's eyes widened as Izuku launched out of the smoke towards her. His fist met her midsection, the smoky gauntlet covering his fist, dampening the blow slightly, but not completely. Najire squeaked in alarm, spiraling wildly away through the air. "That's it. Midoriya wins," Mirio called. Najire reoriented herself and floated down to the ground, a smile on her face. Izuku hopped between a series of platforms, landing beside the periwinkle girl with a rather bemused expression. Mirio jogged over, clapping Izuku on the shoulder. "See? We might have a year on you, but you're practically on an even footing with us. You've pretty much been Izawa's personal student for almost a month," Mirio exclaimed. "The three of us really struggled in our first years to even use our quirks the way we wanted. Permeation would activate at random, and the fine-tuning for little changes was impossible. Surge used up almost all of Najire's stamina in one burst, and she couldn't regulate it yet. Manifest only worked for 1 or 2 minutes at a time, and the manifestations weren't that big or strong. We spent most of our first year catching up to our peers in terms of quirk control. Now we're working on catching up in technique. You see the similarities?" Izuku nodded. The four of them had similar problems and had so far worked to similar points. The older three students' quirks were much more finicky to use than Izuku's, which was the only reason he'd been able to catch up to them in terms of battle prowess. They would be able to help the other train for the exams in 2 weeks without the youngest holding them back. "So, are you in Midoriya?" Mirio asked. "I'm in. And call me Izuku." Izuku grinned. Mirio's smile matched Izuku's. Najire beamed, bouncing on the spot. Tamaki cracked a small smile. "Then let's get started. Power." Mirio cheered, sinking into the ground whilst striking a heroic pose. Izuku walked into practice facility A, raising a hand in greeting to Tamaki, who was the distraction near the entrance. "Hey Tamaki. Is Mirio here yet?" he asked, dodging a Najire wave and putting up a smokescreen. "And no," Tamaki replied, not very convincingly. Najire dodged a smoke bomb and threw a 5% blast at Izuku, which was blocked by a weak shield. Izuku put up a staggered triple-layer shield between himself and Mirio, who was trying to spring up behind him, and launched a solid wall at the floating spiral girl. Mirio attacked from the front, getting a glancing blow on Izuku's outstretched arm before Izuku created a tough barrier between them, leaving himself open to a 15% Najire blast from above. The shockwave hit Izuku in the back, sending him flying forwards into Tamaki's reach. Giant red tentacles reached out but were cut up by a series of monomolecular blades, which let Izuku use a smoke bomb to propel himself into the air and reorient himself. Najire flew up to meet him, Mirio sank into the ground and ejected himself into the air at high speed. Tamaki readied his wings and clam shells, and Izuku stood on a platform high above them, a cigarette in his mouth and dark smoke swirling around him, the mass increasing by the second. "That's enough," Izawa called, stopping the spar. "All of you get down here." Najire floated down, while Izuku caught Mirio with a platform and lowered the both of them to the ground. Tamaki just returned to his normal human form and walked over to Izawa. The four of them gathered around the man, who was holding several slips of paper. "As you know, your exams are tomorrow," he started once they arrived. "The summer training camp will take place for 1 week during the summer holidays, which you all will hopefully be attending. Now, tomorrow at 9 am, Tagada and Amajiki be at Battleground 5 for your exam. Midoriya, Hadu, Battleground 6. Be on time, wear your costumes. You will be briefed on your exam when you arrive at the site. Any questions?" "I'm taking the same exam as Najire?" Izuku asked. Izawa smiled, strangely unmaniacally. "Yes. The staff has decided that you're more than capable enough to take the same exam as the second years. Honestly, the usual first year exam would be a joke if you took it. So, second year exam. You might want to spend today's session going over your super moves before tomorrow." Izawa handed them each one of the papers in his hand and slunk off into the corner, pulling his sleeping bag from thin air and climbing into it. Izuku looked down at the paper. It had the place and time of his exam tomorrow, as well as who he would be working with, Najire. The girl in question gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up, while Mirio clapped him on the shoulder in congratulations. "Good job, Izuku," he exclaimed. The Quadrio spent the next few hours working on their ultimate moves. Najire had a low-power, rapid-fire move that would barrage opponents without seriously harming them. Tamaki had a multiple manifestation move that he could mix and match certain foods for, called Chimera. Mirio had been working on an ultimate move called Phantom Menace. He would phase through whatever solid objects were available, walls, floors and ceilings, using the ribbon created by emerging to launch into another surface, building speed as he moves around unpredictably while pummeling opponents when he passed them. Izuku had been working on a non-lethal offensive move, which if used correctly, could end a fight against multiple opponents instantly. He'd finally gotten the hang of making simple 3D shapes. They weren't perfect, but they were pretty consistently sturdy and well-shaped so long as Izuku concentrated for a few seconds. Izuku and Mirio trained together to improve their ultimate moves. Izuku created the landscape, a complicated set of rooms and corridors, while Mirio used his super move over and over again against Izuku, who needed to alter and maintain the landscape every so often, whilst also fighting off his older friend. "So why did you pair the weakest four together for the end-of-term exams?" Snipe asked, looking up from his paperwork at the man opposite him. Izawa raised an eyebrow. "I didn't pair the weakest four together for the exam. I paired an untouchable powerhouse with a versatile defense, attack and support. I also paired a maneuverable battering ram with a versatile, maneuverable, near-untouchable powerhouse. Each of them could probably take on a third-year one-on-one and win spectacularly," he said, a confident smirk on his face. President Mick looked up and chipped in. "Why those pairings then? Tagada and Midoriya together would work pretty well for the exam. So would Hadu and Amajiki, with their flight," he said. "Amajiki is most comfortable around Tagada, their childhood friends. He'll come out of his shell and ace the exam paired with Tagada. Midoriya is the only person able to keep up with Hadu when she gets nervous or excited. He's also a master strategist to balance out her gung-ho attitude," Izawa replied. He smirked. "You think they're the weakest, so I've ensured that they'll show you why they're the strongest. Those four are going to go far." Izuku walked up to Battleground 6, his costume on and ready for the coming task. He had already filled his suit with smoke and had his cigarettes ready to hand should he need them. Najire was already there, waiting for him. She had a piece of paper in hand and beamed when she saw him. "Izuku, look. Our assignment," she exclaimed, holding out the piece of paper to him. "Defeat and capture all enemies within the time limit. Your opponents must not be seriously damaged. You must not damage the city. You must not disrupt the civilians' lives. Points will be deducted for damage to the villains, damage to the environment, and impediment of traffic. Your time limit is 30 minutes, starting on the buzzer." "This is tough," Izuku muttered. "We don't know where the villains are, how many there are or what they are. They could be other students, robots or even the staff. My quirk really isn't suited for this. I could very easily damage the buildings if I engage villains in narrow spaces." Najire spoke up. "My quirk is quite good in this situation," Izuku continued. "I can capture villains without involving civilians or stopping traffic. I can also protect the buildings while attacking at the same time. I should scout from above and you follow behind looking more carefully. I can buzz you if I spot someone, then you can come in for the capture," Najire said. Izuku nodded. I can hold my structures across long distances, the size of the city isn't a problem. The main problem is number of targets, but I can easily transport the villains we catch along with me to imprison multiple villains in one box. He finished. It's half an hour, so there's probably only 30 villains or less, which is good. I'll try to search the buildings as I go by circling and looking in through the windows. Najire said. They waited another few minutes beside the closed doors, Izuku smoking and Najire bouncing nervously on the spot. The moment the doors opened and the buzzer rang, Najire jumped into the air and flew above the rooftops, scouting for villains. Izuku followed behind her, peering into the bottom floor windows and around alley corners. Najire was the first to find a villain, 10 seconds into the exercise. The glass office building, north side, 5th floor. Izuku blasted off with a smoke grenade, using several in quick succession, alongside some stepping stones to reach the office building and circling around to the north side. The robot was half hidden behind a desk and computer. So that's how it was going to be. Izuku let smoke permeate through the gaps between the windows and the window frames, surrounding the robot and imprisoning it in a perfectly cuboid box, strong enough to contain a minor strength enhancement quirk. The corner shop across the street, in the back room. Izuku nodded to Najire as they passed above the street full of self-driving cars, which was to simulate rush hour traffic. Approximately 22 minutes and 34 seconds later, Izuku and Najire landed back at the entrance to the city, where a grinning Aizawa and slack-jawed Present Mick were standing. Well done, you found and captured all 80 villain bots, with absolutely no damage done to them or the buildings, and the traffic didn't even notice your presence. You still have. He glanced at his watch. 7 minutes and 16 seconds left, so that's bonus points. Good job. You can let the villain robots go now, Midoriya, if you haven't done that already. Izuku let out a sigh of relief, releasing his hold on the 76 smoke prisons around the mock city. The Gada and Amajiki are just rounding up the last few robots, they'll be done in just a few minutes with a perfect score like you two. Go and shower, change back into your uniforms and wait for the other two. Aizawa said, walking off. Present Mick followed after him in a daze, his mouth still hanging open. Izuku and Najire headed to the changing rooms and showered. Izuku was joined 3 minutes later by Mirio and Tamaki, who turned their own showers on after greeting him tiredly. Man, you and Najire destroyed the test. Mirio exclaimed. Me and Tamaki did pretty well, I scouted inside buildings, while Tamaki captured the villains with his octopus tentacles. We actually had to improvise restraints at one point, using bent steel bars and wires and stuff. We lost points by destroying the environment, but got them back by finishing 4 minutes early. Izuku nodded, washing soap out of his hair. Najire was the scout for us, and I made the prisons. He said. Ah, all that shape training finally came in handy. Mirio said enthusiastically. Izuku smiled. Yeah. Air can still permeate the walls, but they're difficult to escape. The only struggle we had was the fact that there were so many robots to find and restrain. Tamaki sighed quietly. I can understand making the test difficult, but 80 villains in half an hour is too much. The boys left the showers and changed into their uniforms, meeting Najire outside and heading up to the main building. I wonder how our classmates did. Najire said. They're all really strong, so probably nobody failed. It was 3 hours later, Izuku was about to head to lunch when the door burst open and his 3 friends came barreling into the classroom, wide-eyed. Even Tamaki seemed almost manic. Izuku. You'll never guess what we found out. Najire exclaimed. Aizawa opened his eyes before grinning within his sleeping bag and closing them again. What is it, what's going on? The greenhead asked, thoroughly confused. We're the top students in the class. Mirio yelled. Izuku took a moment to think it over. Wait, top? How do you know? He asked excitedly. Our classmates wanted to compare scores with each other. Najire began. The biggest number of captured robots I heard was 23. They didn't have any simulated traffic and their robots weren't lurking inside the buildings, just in the alleyways. And they didn't have to capture the faux villains with minimal damage done to them. It was more of an optional extra credit thing for our classmates, not a requirement. Mirio said. There's a class ranking put on the homeroom billboard behind the teacher's desk. Tamaki interjected quietly. We were at the very top, rather than the bottom like the end of last year. Izuku smiled almost blindingly at his friends. Guys, that's awesome. Where did each of you place? I got 3rd. Tamaki said. I got 4th. Najire beamed. I came in 2nd. Mirio said proudly. We all got a perfect score, but you and Najire finished with more time to spare and extra points. I think it was something like 120% to or 110%. That's great. Who came in first? Izuku asked. Mirio tilted his head like it was a stupid question. Najire mimicked his movement, while Tamaki seemed confused. PFF, what kind of question is that? There's only one person it could be. Mirio exclaimed. Who? Izuku. You're the top student in Class 2A unofficially, of course. Mirio had insisted that they celebrate Izuku's victory over his upperclassmen. Izuku had asked if they'd like to come over for dinner. His 3 friends had readily agreed, while Linko was ecstatic her baby finally had friends over. She didn't even tease him over the fact that one of them was a girl, this time anyway, instead being content to ask about how Izuku was doing in school and embarrassing him in other ways, like getting out the baby album. Mirio had joked that his dad would do exactly the same if they were at his apartment. Tamaki had just smiled quietly at the pictures, occasionally speaking up to ask how Izuku had gotten into that predicament, questions that Inko was all too happy to answer. The gyre had been by far the worst. She and Inko immediately hit it off and spent most of their time teasing Izuku over his baby pictures, or chatting animatedly about how well he was doing in school, which Mirio took great enjoyment out of, the traitor. Izuku had never been happier. Izuku nodded to Aizawa as he walked over to the bus bay, his suitcase in hand. The summer training camp started today. Well, more accurately, the second year's plus Izuku's training camp started today. Since Izuku was on his own, there was little point in holding an entire training camp for just him. So that he could have the experience, Izuku was going with the second years, who were quite eager to meet him. Aizawa's expression was grim, which set Izuku on edge. Something was very wrong. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to distract you from your exam preparations, but now I think it's a good time to motivate you. He said. His words were light, but his tone and expression remained stone cold. The same purple portal has been appearing with different brain creatures and abducting people. There have been 4 kidnappings since your work study. One of which was Mr. Sakamoto, the man you saved the first time we came across the brain creature and portal combination. I've been able to link several kidnappings in the past to the most recent ones. Bystanders remember seeing a purple mist around the area of the kidnappings. It's consistent enough to link the cases together. Izuku frowned. Why kidnap so many people? What do they gain? He asked. It gets worse. Aizawa reassured. A blood sample was found at a scene about 6 months ago now. It didn't match the victim, and the sample was so contaminated it was impossible to find the real culprit. Contaminated how? Izuku asked. There were DNA samples of 3 different people, all of which had gone missing 8, 9 and 13 months prior to that incident. They were almost unidentifiable, but it was specifically the quirk factors of those people. Minor regeneration, minor shock displacement and reflex. The victim, by the way, had a rather powerful strength enhancer. As always said grimly. The brain creatures. They're tailored to beat the victims. The one attacking Mr. Sakamoto had a strong strength enhancer. I'd be willing to bet it came from the kidnapping you just mentioned. Izuku said, his horror mounting. Someone's collecting and exchanging quirks between people like loose change, creating living weapons that can be tailored to an individual you want killed. Or just make a standing army, who's to say? Izuku thought for a moment. What were the quirks of the most recent victims? He asked. Mr. Sakamoto had shock absorption. The very powerful one. The next had super regeneration, the one after had a rather impressive speed enhancer called burst. The next was a pain dampener, and the one just before Sakamoto had a pretty similar quirk called impact recoil. He listed off angrily. They've made specialist creatures for kidnapping victims. Now they're making a living sandbag that can fight back. Izuku murmured. Their next target will be stronger than a civilian. Much stronger. I thought the same thing. Aizawa confirmed. They're going to start going after heroes. Where better to acquire strong quirks than the people who use them to walk to the top? Izuku asked rhetorically. Izuku. Mr. Aizawa. Nijire called. Izuku's expression immediately brightened as he turned to his friends. Hey guys. He said. You excited for your first training camp? Mirio asked, arm swinging energetically as he strode forwards. Of course. Izuku replied. Are you alright Izuku? Nijire asked, picking up on his earlier mood. I'm fine. Something happened with the case that came up during my work study, and it's worrying. I'll be okay though. He reassured her. The Quadrio plus Aizawa were joined soon after by the rest of Class 2A, a girl with close cropped pink hair, approached him and shook his hand. You must be Midoriya. I'm Misa, the class president of Class 2A. If you need anything, don't hesitate to come to me. You might be an unofficial member, but that's more than enough in our eyes. She said. Izuku shook several students' hands, most of which congratulated him on thoroughly thrashing them during the exam. Class 2A's homeroom teacher ushered them all onto the bus. The 4 friends sat near the front of the coach, Mirio and Tamaki in front of where Izuku and Nijire were sitting. Mirio had brought a handheld console with multiple wireless controllers, which Izuku suspended in the air by embedding it in a small shield and floating it up slightly. The 4 of them played Superhero Fighters, a game that they'd held mini tournaments with in their spare time after school or during lunch and break times. Izuku was banned from using All Might, who was by far the most OP character in the game. Nijire mained Ryukyu, Tamaki normally played Fatgum, Mirio switched between Edge Shot and Best Jeanist, and Izuku mained Gang Orca, who had a somewhat similar moveset to All Might with his sonic waves, instead of air blasts and muscular build. They played for a few hours, Tamaki once again completely dominating them with Fatgum's insane defense. Izuku was able to win a few matches with Gang Orca's high attack, and Nijire won some with Ryukyu's all-roundedness. Edge Shot's maneuverability gave Mirio a single victory before he swapped to Best Jeanist and got hammered. Once they put the game away, Izuku scrolled through some hero forums on his phone, mainly focusing on the 18 villains All Might had captured trying to rob a bank that morning in Tokyo. A weight settled onto Izuku's shoulder an hour later, pulling his attention away from the old All Might video he was once again watching on repeat. Nijire had fallen asleep and was slumped into him. There was a quiet click and Izuku's face turned bright red. "Delete that." He hissed at Mirio, who was peeking over the back of his chair, phone in hand. "But you look so comfy snuggled up together like that," Mirio teased. "I will Darth Vader your windpipe, Tintin," Izuku threatened. "Ha. Tintin. That's a new one, broccoli boy," Mirio chortled quietly. Izuku spent the rest of the trip on edge as Nijire snuggled closer to him gradually and Mirio turned every so often and snickered. At long last, the bus stopped on a rocky clifftop overlooking a forest, a mountain rising out of the ground in the distance. Mirio wiggled his eyebrows at Izuku and hopped off the bus, Tamaki following behind. "Traitors." Izuku tapped the top of Nijire's head where she was nuzzled into his shoulder, her arms wrapped around his. "Nijire, we're here." The girl grumbled, lifting her head and staring right into his eyes sleepily. "Where are we?" she asked. "Rest stop," he said. Nijire untangled herself from Izuku and stretched her arms above her head, groaning quietly. "Let's go then," she said, her usual bouncy energy back as she shot out of her chair and got off the bus. Izuku followed after her, rejoining the other two boys who were standing near the cliff edge. Mirio grinned at him and received a fist to his side for his troubles. "Did something happen after I fell asleep?" Nijire asked. "No," Izuku replied quickly. "Yes," Mirio said. Nijire tilted her head in confusion at Izuku's red face and Mirio's grin. "Alright everyone, you know the drill," Class 2A's homeroom teacher said. "The pussycats are at the lodge, Pixie Bob is already in position. Get going." Izuku watched in shock as the class threw themselves off the cliff. "Come on Izuku," Mirio yelled, diving off the edge. "We've got to get to the base of the mountain by lunch." Tamaki followed after Mirio, while Nijire hopped off the edge and floated down a moment later. Trusting his friends, Izuku dove off the edge, a cigarette already between his teeth, the lighter protected from the wind by his cupped hands. A series of smoke bombs redirected his momentum, letting Izuku drop to the ground safely. The class were already charging into the trees. Nijire landed beside him, while Tamaki lowered himself from where he'd grabbed onto the cliff face. Mirio ejected himself from the ground in nothing but a pair of boxers. His uniform was in a crumpled pile a few meters away. "There's an army of earth beasts and other traps between us and the mountain," Mirio explained. "The challenge we were given in our first year was to get there by lunchtime. Of course, nobody managed it. This year though, we have the advantage. You've perfected your quirk control, so you can just ping-pong yourself to the end. Nijire and Tamaki can fly, and I can propel myself in pseudo-flight with smoke bombs," Izuku said. Mirio grinned. "Exactly. But then that would be no fun. So I say we fight whatever earth beasts we come across as we make our way to the end. The goal is still lunchtime though." Izuku nodded, a small smile on his face. "Alright. May the best hero win." The four of them sprinted into the trees. Nijire propelled herself along with low-power blasts, weaving through the trees with ease. Mirio ran through anything and everything that got in his way, including the giant earth monsters. Tamaki used cow hooves and chicken wings to half-run half-fly his way through the trees. Izuku struggled at first, smoke bomb not designed to maneuver in confined spaces like dense forests. He tried bouncing from tree to tree while using smoke bomb to propel himself, but without something holding him in the air, he would just fall to the ground. But why couldn't he hold himself up? His newest ultimate move would be the perfect solution to this problem. It wasn't by any means complete or stable if he tried to do the entire thing at once, but just to lift himself up. Dark Cloak could do that. Izuku gathered the smoke on his chest and abdomen, letting it shape itself around him and leaning forwards. He floated a meter or so off the ground, lying on his front atop the half-finished ultimate move. Eventually it would be his strongest shield and sharpest spear, but for now it would serve well as a means of transportation. After that, Izuku darted through the forest faster than anyone else, creating pointed shields before his face and smashing right through Earth Beast's face first, lying on his stomach. Mirio caught up to him a few minutes later, phantom menacing between the trees like a demented pinball. "Is that the new move you've been working on?" he asked, permeating in and out of the floor, trees and beasts. Izuku just gave a thumbs up, not bothering to try and communicate when his ears were fluctuating between deaf and working like that. Mirio grinned. "Sick. Looks like Voldemort from the last film." Izuku looked down at himself. He actually did look kinda like an apparating Death Eater from those old Harry Potter films Mirio made them all watch a while ago. They smashed through another earth beast together and were soon joined by Nijire and Tamaki. Tamaki needed a minute to get the hang of running around a forest in this form. Nijire said. "Whoa, Izuku. You look so cool." Izuku blushed, pulling the smoke up slightly to hide his face from the nose down and eyebrows up. "Thanks," he mumbled. Soon enough, only Izuku's bright green eyes could be seen in the smoke, almost glowing in the dark fog, tearing its way through earth beasts and maneuvering perfectly around trees. The group of 4 tore their way through the forest, not letting any earth beasts they came across live any longer than a few seconds. They made it to the lodge at 1:45, somewhat dirty from all the earth flying everywhere, but only a little out of breath. Our cloak was difficult to maintain, but not as bad as creating shields used to be. Nijire had an insane amount of stamina and had used very little power to zoom between the trees. Mirio's quirk wasn't tiring to use, he was only out of breath because he'd insisted on running the last few hundred meters. Tamaki was the most exhausted, but thanks to the training they'd all gone through he wasn't as exhausted as expected. Mandalay and Ragdoll of the wild pussycats were waiting for them when they stepped out of the trees. Mr. Aizawa was leaning against the wall of the main building, a smirk on his face. "Are we on time for lunch?" Mirio asked, putting on his uniform that Tamaki had carried for him. Summer training camp was hell on earth. The point of the training camp was to have a week dedicated to quirk training. Thanks to that, everyone's training was individually tailored to them. Tamaki had to eat and manifest as many foods as he could almost continuously. He was almost sick on a number of occasions. The more manifestations he could use at once, the more options he would have in battle. Mirio was improving his lung capacity, as well as his fine control over permeating certain body parts and ignoring others. The longer he could hold his breath, the longer he could stay permeable. Nijire was doing intense stamina training, running around the camp until she dropped, had a drink and kept going. The more stamina she had, the longer she could use her quirk for and at higher outputs. Izuku's training was more technique-based than output-based. He could already control an impressive amount of smoke at a time, all he needed to do was fine-tune his control. More separate masses of smoke, doing different things with the smoke like moving, solidifying, shaping, moving and shaping and solidifying over and over again. He also worked on perfecting Dark Cloak, which the control training he was doing was helping a lot. After the 3rd day of straight quirk training, Aizawa attacked Izuku. Of course his concentration broke completely and the multiple smoky shapes he was handling turned wispy and unsolidified. And he got a bruise for his troubles. You need to work on maintaining total control over your quirk in a fight. So I'm going to push you to your physical limits while you push your quirk past its own. We're not going to do this until you get it right. We're going to do it until you don't get it wrong. Aizawa had said. Then they'd fought without quirks, hand to hand. For hours on end. While Izuku maintained 20 individual 3D shapes, keeping their defined edges and solidifying them then unsolidifying them over and over again. And occasionally swapping them so that pyramids became spheres, cubes became pyramids and spheres became squares. Without dropping. 1. On day 7, the last day of camp, everyone was given a task to complete. Whether it be destroy A or retrieve B, what would have been difficult or impossible for the students before was achieved with minimal difficulty. Nijire needed to use 10 100% attacks consecutively. She did 13 before feeling weak. Tamaki needed to manifest 5 different foods at once and use them to conquer an earthy obstacle course. He used 6 and beat it in under a minute. Mirio hadn't really improved his quirk, he'd improved his ability to use it effectively. He was able to hold his breath for a full minute before almost passing out. Izuku needed to construct a life-sized Aizawa in relatively good detail. He gave the smoky clone individual freaking eyelashes. When he really thought about it, most objects could be created through combining and resizing the 3 basic shapes he'd mastered. After that, smoke construction came easy. The smoke Aizawa was a little more brittle than he would have liked, but it would have taken a relatively decent strength quirk to break it. His friends had applauded the construction, understanding its significance as yet another milestone Izuku had raced past. Aizawa raised an eyebrow at the detailed replica of himself. The skin was even colored the same shade as his own. And the capture weapon was a wispy white, while the jumpsuit and his hair remained black. You could even barely see the bright yellow goggles around the clone's neck. You could tell it was made of smoke and just a replica of the man, but it was well made nonetheless. Once every student had shown their improvements, they were given time to go to the hot springs, mess about in the forest, or do whatever they liked before the buses would return them to the UA campus. Izuku, Mirio and Tamaki relaxed in the hot springs, while Najira decided to have something to eat to regain some of her spent energy. The men's side was completely empty other than the three friends, which Mirio decided to take advantage of. "So, Izuku," he said, a small grin beginning to spread across his face. "Any particular reason you've been avoiding Najira all week?" Izuku sank deeper into the water. "We've been training Mirio. I in particular have been the victim of torture via Racerhead," he responded, dodging the question. Mirio raised an eyebrow sarcastically. "So you don't have a stupidly massive crush on our female friend?" he asked, the grin still on his face. Izuku sank further, his eyes unable to meet Mirio's, his head the only part of him above the waterline. "No," he mumbled. Mirio laughed, and Tamaki chuckled quietly. Izuku turned away from them in a huff. "Well, you sure convinced us, Izuku," Mirio exclaimed, letting out a laugh every now and again. Yeah, laugh it up. That's super mature of you, Mirio. You know, for a second there I almost believed you were trustworthy, thanks for confirming what a traitor you are." Izuku fumed irritably. Mirio snickered, reaching over and clapping Izuku on the shoulder. "It's alright, I'm just messing with you. You don't need to be embarrassed about it, we're your friends. Besides, I think you'd make an adorable pair. Right, Tamaki?" he asked. The normally timid boy closed his eyes and nodded slowly like a sage old man, a small smile on his face. Izuku sighed dejectedly while Mirio just shook him. "See? We might tease you about it sometimes, but we're not gonna shun you for it or hold your little crush over your head," the blonde said. Izuku sighed in defeat, slumping slightly. "But what if she finds out and thinks I'm weird or something?" Tamaki snorts very uncharacteristically, while Mirio barks out a laugh. "You don't have to worry about that. Before all of this, who fancies who and what could possibly go wrong in an alternate universe, she is your friend first and foremost," he said. Seeing Izuku's unsure expression, he continued. "Alright, think of it this way. If I told you I was gay and fancied you, would you immediately start hating me if you didn't feel the same? I'm not, and I don't, by the way. This is just hypothetical," he reassured the greenette. Izuku shook his head. "No. Even if I didn't feel the same way, you'd still be my friend," he said slowly. Mirio grinned. "Exactly. Even if she doesn't feel the same, that doesn't mean she'll stop being your friend. And in a few years we'd be able to laugh about it while having a movie night or something. Najira's not the type to abandon friends over something so silly." Izuku nodded, thinking the words over in his mind. Now that Mirio had pointed it out, it seemed obvious. Najira just wasn't that kind of person. "I think you should tell her." Mirio spoke up. What? No." Izuku spluttered. "That is a bad idea, the worst I've ever heard, and I've done some pretty stupid things in my life." Mirio shrugged. "That's just what I think. You don't have to do it, but I believe it would be best if you did," he said. The trio remained silent the rest of their time in the springs, Mirio shooting Izuku meaningful glances now and again, which were pointedly ignored. Eventually they went and packed a few things they'd brought with them, meeting up with Najira for dinner before the bus ride home. Mirio and Tamaki were sat in front of Izuku and Najira again, the former of which grinned and wiggled his eyebrows at Izuku, who proceeded to glare at the blonde. Most people fell asleep within the first hour. Najira slumped into him again on the second, and Izuku conked out on the third, despite his embarrassment at the hands of Mirio. Izuku woke up with his vision filled with blue. He blinked groggily at the blue, hoping that would clear his vision up. Well, now he could see individual strands, so obviously this wasn't his eyes finally giving out, it was a head of hair. It was a nice shade of blue. His favorite actually. When did blue become Izuku's favorite color? He couldn't tell you. It just sort of did. Izuku's entire right side was warm. There was something resting on his shoulder and wrapped around his right arm. Whatever he was leaning on was quite comfortable. Izuku's groggy brain struggled to pick up where he had been before he fell asleep. Training camp? No, they'd left on the bus after dinner. Izuku sighed, turning slightly and coming face to face with Mirio over the blue thing, who was wiggling his eyebrows. Izuku found that mildly irritating for some reason. "What?" he croaked. "Comfy there, Izuku. We're back at UA, so wake Najira up, will you?" "Oh. Bugger. It took Inko a day to figure it out." "Who is it?" she asked at dinner. "Who's what, mum?" Izuku asked. "The girl. Or boy," she said. Izuku almost spat out his katsudon. "Almost. What? Why do you think that I?" Inko giggled quietly. "Sweetie, it's written all over your face. And I'm your mother, I can tell these things," she said. "So who is it? I already get teased enough by Mirio." Even Tamaki chips in occasionally. I don't need someone else embarrassing me about it. He grumbled childishly, picking at his dinner. So Najira isn't in on the secret? Inko asked, a smile spreading across her face. Izuku froze, and Inko's smile grew wider. Well then, I approve. She said. Mum. Izuku slumped down onto the bench beside Mirio. He could see Najira and Tamaki walking across the park to join them. Mum figured it out. Took her a day. He said. Mirio shrugged with a smile. That's how parents are. Our parents would probably get on like a house on fire. If they ever met. We must never let that happen. Agreed. Najira and Tamaki sat on the bench either side of the two, Mirio's eyebrows doing an impression of a pair of caterpillars as Izuku's face colored. So, where are we going? Najira asked. Is it fun? Will there be food? We're going. Mirio said dramatically. To the arcade. It was easy to figure out why Mirio chose the arcade. Quite a few of the games were older versions of the fighting games they played on Mirio's console. Of course All Might has always been stupidly op, so Izuku was banned from using him in any of the games there too. They got lunch afterwards and spent some time just wandering around Musatafu. They were all recognized from the sports festival, to Izuku's embarrassment. The Quadrio spent most of the summer just going out to new places and hanging out. Sometimes one of them was busy with family or had other plans, meaning their Quadrio occasionally became a trio or duo. A few instances were fabricated by Mirio, who conveniently had some vague plans already, while Tamaki had an appointment or was visiting his grandparents in Hosu. Consequently, Izuku and Najira were left on their own at some point every week to hang out together. They had fun, but Izuku was a nervous wreck 70% of the time. Until the day before school resumed, when Mirio set up a final pseudo-date. Smoke Might. Why does my name insinuate a high All Might? Latinton. Lamau. Smoke Might. Park. Latinton. What? Smoke Might. Park. Latinton. Is this about your dad? Smoke Might. Pi Ark. Latinton. Alright, hold your smoky horses. Mirio entered the almost deserted park, immediately spotting his friend's bushy green hair resting on a picnic table. He sat down beside Izuku and rested his chin on his palm. You alright buddy? I'm fine. Did you confess your undying love and she rejected you? No. Did someone else come along and she kissed me? And that's bad. Why? It's not. Suo. I'm just kind of stunned. Understandable. So, are you together now? I don't know. I mean, she kissed me. On the cheek. And just sort of skipped away while I stood there. I see. Probably not then. But maybe soon. I feel stupid. That's normal. Okay. I still feel stupid though. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Are you gonna go home anytime soon? Probably not. Although I should. Yeah. Do you wanna come over and play Smash Heroes? Sure. Come on then. They played for a few hours, on duo campaign mode, Izuku demolishing the opposition with all might. After the final boss, which had been thoroughly beaten with much yelling and name-calling of the villain organization Shadow Leader who had an unknown, multifaceted set of abilities, Izuku just sat and stared at the screen for a few seconds. It's just hit me. Ah. Are you going to go up onto the roof and scream in joy? No. I'm going to sit here and robotically demolish every CPU while I think about feelings. Now that I have to see. True to his word, Izuku used Wash, the weakest hero in the game, to destroy multiple max-level CPUs at a time, even taking on All Might and only losing by a thin sliver of health. Have you figured out the meaning of life yet? Mirio asked, grinning slightly. No, but I know what I'm going to do. And no, I'm not telling you. You'll just try to help and be an ass about it. An ass? Me? No. When are you going to tell her? After the licensing exam in 3 weeks. Mirio shrugged. That's fair. Just don't leave it too long. What if she does something before then though? It could. It wasn't just a friendly kiss, that's A, not a thing, and B, she was skipping, you said. I think that explains itself. Mirio cut him off. He thought for a moment. It's not a thing unless you're French. They sat in silence for a moment, Mirio wielding Wash on screen to far inferior effect than Izuku. We're going to be making more ultimate moves soon. Got anything in mind? The blonde asked. I've got a few ideas. Should be simple enough too, just a stylized version of an old move. You? I've got an idea to blind opponents. I can use the same move to attack through shields and raised arms too. Something like Blinder Touch Eyeball Crush. Izuku snorted. Why not keep with the Star Wars theme? You've just given me a brilliant idea. The four of us could have a Star Wars themed ultimate move. You could make a smoke collar around an opponent's neck and lift them up with it. Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, director. Izuku said in an eerily good impression, holding his hand up as though he were pinching someone's windpipe. The duo cackled and continued making silly impressions of various characters until late into the evening. Today you'll be working on ultimate moves. Some of you already have a few, but if you want a leg up in the provisional exam you'll need as many as you can make. Class 2A's homeroom teacher spoke. Quite a few of the teachers were here, including Ectoplasm, Eraserhead and Cementus. You'll be using this facility to create and refine them, which can be molded to your needs by Cementus. Should you require an opponent or helping hand, Ectoplasm can aid you with his clones. Now, get to it. Izuku, Mirio, Tamaki and Najire immediately grouped up. So what's everyone working on? Mirio asked as they walked into a small isolated area. I want to work on improving my rapid fire with bigger blasts. Najire said. I want to refine my Chimera mode. Tamaki mumbled. I'm going to be creating an entirely new move. Mirio told them. I'm going to be repurposing an old move. And maybe refining Dark Cloak. It's almost perfect, but it could use a few improvements. Izuku said. Alright. Tamaki, you have the open space over there. Najire, those concrete pillars should be what you need. I'll just be over here, trying to time an impermeable punch with the wall. Izuku, you take the middle of this section. Mirio said. I'm going to ask Cementus for some targets. Izuku said, waving to the hero. 5 minutes later and Izuku was standing before a cement pillar, concentrating on his hand. More specifically, the solid smoke gauntlet on his arm. He held his hand out flat, letting the smoke reform around it, flattening and lengthening outwards. Monomolecular blade Mark II. Izuku swung his arm at the target, cleaving it in two with no resistance at all. Thanks to his training, his monomolecular blade was truly monomolecular and far sturdier than the original. He could still use it at range if needed like during the exam, but he would mainly be using it to clear rubble. The blade was tapered like a real sword blade, so that his entire hand was encased in smoke, both perfectly protected and capable of offense. It also incorporated well into Dark Cloak, which he would be using the rest of the 2 weeks training to improve. Izuku formed a second monomolecular gauntlet onto his left hand, swiping wildly at the concrete pillar, cutting it into tiny chunks from the top down. He turned and grinned at his friends, who had turned to look at the flurry of movement. Welp, I'm done. Time to work on my second ultimate move of the day. Oh, that's how it is, huh? Alright Izuku, you're on. Mirio exclaimed, turning back to the wall and punching it, yelling an ow. Seconds later. Izuku spent the rest of the day messing around with Dark Cloak, testing what he could do with it, just how far he could push smoke. The next 2 weeks passed by in a blur, the Quadrio creating and mastering new ultimate moves every few days. Similarly to the training camp, they showcased their new and improved moves at the end of the 2 weeks. Blinder Touch Eyeball Crush. Mirio shouted, punching through Izuku's face. The younger boy had agreed to be Mirio's test dummy, but only after he promised not to mess the move up on purpose. Mirio showcased all 10 of his ultimate moves he'd created and practiced with in the 1.5 years he'd been training at UA. The gyro only had a few moves, but they were all versatile and useful in different situations. Tamaki's entire quirk was an ultimate move in itself, he showed them off attacking an ectoplasm clone. Finally, as the unofficial member of Class 2A, Izuku showed his own moves. Smoke Bomb, Dark Shield, Wall, Monomolecular Blade, Monomolecular Gauntlet, Smokescreen, Dark Whirlwind, Dark Cloak, Smoke Construct, Dark Tether, Dark Choke, Detroit Shield and Dark Smash. Most were pretty self-explanatory. Dark Shield was just a smaller, sturdier wall. Dark Tether was basically an imitation of Tamaki's tentacles. Dark Smash was a super punch, created by empowering his blows with fast-moving smoke. Detroit Shield was Izuku's strongest defense. Theoretically, it could stand up to a Detroit Smash head-on, one of All Might's strongest moves. In practice it was just 12 Dark Shields layered over one another. It would do its job. Hopefully. It could take a 100% Najire wave head-on and thwarted Tamaki's attempts to break through it even after that fact. The entirety of Class 2A had launched their powers and even a few ultimate moves at it and barely got through the third layer. Man, that's a tough shield. Najire exclaimed as they walked to the changing rooms. I don't know about a Detroit Smash, but even the top 10 minus All Might working together would struggle with that. Mirio said. Izuku just smiled, scratching the back of his neck bashfully. By the way. Mirio said. I have Phantom Menace, and Izuku has Dark Choke. You two need to come up with a Star Wars themed ultimate move too. Tamaki chuckled quietly, while Najire laughed out loud. We should totally do that. She said. We should have a refresher on the films too. Mirio wheedled. We can do a movie night, but we're not watching Star Wars again. Izuku said flatly. What do you think we should watch then? The blonde asked. Well, there's this new All Might. No. The other three said simultaneously. How about Jaws 25? Tamaki asked. You only like that film because the hero has tentacle powers like you. Izuku said. How about a Pixar film? Najire exclaimed. Which one? Mirio asked suspiciously. Wall-E. It's my favorite, she said. You say that about all of the old Pixar titles. Mirio argued. But you haven't seen Wall-E yet. It's definitely the best one. I don't mind watching it, Izuku said. Mirio gave him a disappointed look. What? It's new, it's not Star Wars Episode 41, or Jaws 88, or All Might Adventures 172. He ground out, still miffed about that. It's the best option we've got. Besides, most of the Pixar films are actually pretty good. He defended. Tamaki nodded along in agreement. You just want to watch Star Wars Episode 0.1, The Ghostly Problem. Tamaki said. Darth Choplum is the best villain. Mirio defended. It's a spoof. Izuku yelled, exasperated. It's canon. Mirio countered. Izuku stepped off of the bus, costume case in hand. Class 2A were already gathered around their homeroom teacher, receiving one last pep talk. The class and Izuku were both taking their first attempt at the provisional exam. Izuku was taking it because he'd shown enough skill and power to attempt it alongside the second years. Izuku stepped up to Izawa, a nervous smile on his face. The man smiled. Don't look so stressed, kid, you're going to ace it. He reassured. But it's such an important exam. What if I mess up? Kid, you're taking this thing early. You can always take it again next year and be over-prepared for a piddly little exam like this. Now go and reveal Wisp to the hero world. Show them why he's gonna be the best. The man smiled. Izuku nodded resolutely, his smile becoming determined. Aizawa raised his fist, which Izuku bumped with his own. At the start of the year, Aizawa swore he would make Izuku into a great hero. 2.5 months later, that promise was coming to fruition. You go, kid. He murmured to Izuku's back as he walked confidently into the main building. Izuku met up with Mirio, Tamaki and Najire in the briefing center, where hundreds of hero students were already gathered. Any idea what we're doing yet? Izuku asked. Nope. Mirio said cheerfully. They waited for a few moments, nervously adjusting their costumes minutely. A tired-looking man walked up onto the podium at the end of the room, stepping before the microphone. Good morning everybody. I am Mara, the representative of the HSPC here today. The man yawned loudly. Sorry. Happens every year, we're so understaffed. Anyway, I'm here to tell you what the first half of the exam will be. It will be an elimination round. Only half of you here will be able to pass the first part. The second art is a rescue operation, but we'll get to that later. He yawned again. Anyway. You'll be playing tag, pretty much. But special tag. With capture tape. Once 178 of you remain uncaptured, the exam will move on to the second half. Those of you that are eliminated here. Better luck next time. Now, everyone gets 3 rolls of capture tape. You can work in groups if you want, no hurting your opponents too badly. There is no capture requirement, you could just hide for the duration of the exam, but it may impact your score at the very end of the exam. Once everyone has their capture tape, you have 5 minutes to position yourselves wherever you like in the stadium other than the stands and inside the building proper. The quadrio collected their capture tape and waited for the 5-minute prep time to start. To their surprise, the walls and ceiling started to move, the entire room falling open to reveal an arena somewhat similar to the USJ, with different areas to combat in. A buzzer sounded, and a countdown appeared on the screen suspended above Mara. Go. He said sleepily. Mirio chucked his capture tape to Izuku and sank into the ground, pointing to the mountain zone as he did. Tamaki manifested wings and launched himself into the air, heading to the mountains as he tucked the tape into one of his many pockets. Najire burst into the sky with a bright explosion of spiraling light, a new move she'd created to propel herself quickly. Izuku let out a breath of smoke, the cigarette in his mouth pushed to the side as he used Dark Cloak, catching Najire and Tamaki and passing them with ease, reaching the top of the mountain at the same time as Mirio popped out of the ground. Najire and Tamaki landed seconds later, the 4 of them huddling up. Alright, so we've got 12 reels of capture tape between us and 335 people to contend with. Mirio started. I might be able to capture people with smoke. He didn't specifically say we needed to use capture tape, he just said we were being given it. Izuku chipped in. Alright. I can't take capture tape with me when I permeate, so Tamaki, you take mine. Plan 3F. I'll be the distraction, Tamaki, you capture. Najire, defend against attacks and throw a few of your own. We're not allowed to hurt the other students too badly, so just be intimidating. Izuku, try out the smoke capture idea. If it works, give Najire your capture tape and join Tamaki in the capture team. I want you taking point because they can't hurt you through your smoke like they can Tamaki and his tentacles. The 3 nodded along with their de facto leader, Tamaki, taking the capture tape and de-manifesting his wings, running across the rocky outcrop towards the only path up the mountain. Najire hovered just behind him, looking around the mountain for other groups before the buzzer went. Mirio had sank into the floor, presumably to let other teams to them. The buzzer rang out, and the game of tag began. Aizawa watched with pride as his star student demolished the competition. He watched Izuku weave between enemies, unseen within the storm of smoke and shields, as he wrapped them up in dark tether and disqualified them one by one. Honestly, that kid could probably take on All Might and put a dent in him at this point. After another month, who knows? The current number 1 had better be prepared to defend his title from a 15-year-old. Aizawa chuckled when Izuku backflipped over an ice quirk-wielding student coming up behind him and wrapped a dark tether around his waist. The student looked a little confused when his hero name was disqualified with an Iceman has been eliminated. He continued to smile to himself, freaking out Miss Joke who was in the seat beside him. She'd stopped talking a few minutes ago the moment he started laughing quietly to himself and was now staring at him with horror across her features, wondering if it was the end of the world. You're laughing. Why are you laughing? What did you do? Who's dead? Oh my god, did you actually kill All Might? I thought you were joking. Thinking on it, that wasn't the best assumption, but you killed him. Aizawa just pointed down at the swirling mass of smoke. They could just about make out Izuku standing in the eye of the storm, eliminating 20 students simultaneously. He raised his smoky hands into the air, the storm expanding and engulfing even more students. He was also cackling maniacally, his smile eerily similar to a certain underground hero. That, he said proudly, is my kid. Izuku looked up as the buzzer sounded. All 178 people still standing, please return to the central area. Anyone who has been captured but not left the arena yet, please go into the building proper. You will be led to where you need to go. Mera's exhausted voice called out. Mirio, Tamaki and Najire rejoined Izuku back in the center building, which was still open to the air. Once all 178 students remaining gathered in the center, Mera began to speak. Congratulations on passing the first half of the exam. But that was just the elimination round. The real test. The model cities to the north, east, south and west were all engulfed in multiple explosions and collapsed. Begins now. Here's the situation. Bombings have occurred in 4 cities nearby to one another. Rescue civilians and save whatever is left of each city. The Hawk will be acting as hurt civilians in this scenario. Please try to take this as seriously as possible. That is all. You have approximately 3 minutes to prepare. He finished with a yawn. Mirio was the de facto leader during evasion, infiltration scenarios. Tamaki was the leader during combat, although he was still working on his confidence. Izuku was the leader during rescue scenarios. Both his analytical mind and quirk were practically made for these kinds of scenarios. Lemillion, scout the city to the north, locate civilians and get heroes suited to the job to get them out. Sun Eater, go east, lift rubble, support the buildings still standing, carry civilians to wherever they're all being gathered. Najire-chan, go west. Scout above the city, look at precarious areas from above, give your perspective. I'll take the south. If anyone needs help, send it through the comms. A few seconds after Izuku finished giving his orders, the buzzer went. Mirio dropped, Tamaki bounded, Najire flew, and Izuku leaped to their respective areas. Izuku raced ahead of the other hero students with dark cloak, reaching the city and immediately spreading his smoke over the area. 1, 2, 6, 12, 19 civilians trapped in the rubble around him. The smoke solidified around the victims, rising and pushing the rubble out of the way. Izuku gathered up all 19 people and smiled at their shocked faces. You don't need to worry, the heroes are here to help. Do any of you know of family members or other people that were around you at the time? He asked gently. One small-looking Hawk worker pointed behind them, wailing quite convincingly. My father. He was right beside me when the explosion happened. Izuku nodded, giving him a small smile. I'm sure your father will be fine. The other heroes will find him while I take you to the medical center. He turned to the odd students behind him. Would you please look inside the small corner shop a few streets over? I believe you'll find a man there. With that, Izuku rose into the air and flew back to the middle of the arena, 19 rescued civilians in tow. No serious injuries other than this lady's broken leg. I've kept it stable with my smoke, but it will need to be set properly. Izuku told the students in the makeshift medical tent. None of the workers were actually hurt, but it was basic procedure to ask civilians about any injuries or whether they're hurt anywhere. The Hawk worker had told him her leg stung like the backside of a wasp. The moment he left the tent, his earpiece crackled. Wisp. We've got an unstable building, with literally no support other than one kid with a minor stasis quirk. Everyone else is an offensive type emitter of some kind. Najire's voice came through. I'm coming, Najire-chan. Lemillion, Sun Eater, have you two had any problems? He asked as he flew west. None on my end. Everyone here's doing really well. A few people were put off by my quietness. But it's all sorted now. Alright. Najire-chan, which building? Oh, never mind, it's the glowing one that's crumbling in slow motion, right? He asked sarcastically. Wisp arrived on scene and immediately cocooned the building in smoke, the smoke hardening within the cracks and keeping the apartment complex together. He took a long pull of his cigarette and blew the smoke out, pulling all of the excess away from the building, leaving a pale concrete tower with big black lines all over it. It's all stable. There are civilians on the second, third and fifth floors. 1 on second, 4 on third and 2 on fifth. The other examinees got to it as Mirio popped out of the ground, huffing and puffing slightly. Everything alright? I came to help, but you've got it sorted. Huo, that could have been bad. Wisp, we need some help transporting civilians. If you're not busy. On my way, Sun Eater. Don't worry, the building will hold even if I'm not here. If you need me, just call. He said, floating into the air and zooming away. Mirio waved, before turning to Najire and doing a double take, his smile returning. You're drooling, Najire-chan. Izuku was just setting down at the medical tent when the city to the north exploded again. Villains. Mirio's voice came through. Ryukyu and her sidekicks. All of the civilians have been evacuated, I made sure of it, why attack now? It's the second half of the exam. Save whatever is left of the cities. Rather than more bombs, the villains are attacking directly. Sun Eater, Najire-chan, keep a lookout for villains in your own areas. He turned to one of the students overseeing the medical area. We're going to need a villain detainment zone. Ryukyu and her sidekicks have appeared in the northern city and started wreaking havoc. I expect villains will be turning up in each of the zones, please let people know. The girl nodded and Izuku soared into the sky again, heading back to the south. As he'd expected, villains were crawling their way across the city, led by Gang Orca. Ryukyu and Gang Orca. What next, All Might? Best Jeanist. Best Jeanist and his sidekicks are here. They're making their way through the city, but I'm pretty sure we got all of the civilians. Tamaki's voice exclaimed. Najire-chan, please tell me that All Might hasn't showed up in your area. He asked. No, it's worse. Worse than All Might. Endeavor. He's torching the buildings that are still standing. He's got a few sidekicks with him who are handling the students, but there are only a few of them. 10 at the maximum, including him. She replied. Izuku stopped in the air above Gang Orca and his sidekicks. Give me 3 minutes and I'll be there to deal with your little fire problem. I've just got to take out Gang Orca first. Izuku arrived at City W, his finger to his ear. Is everyone alright? I'm fine. The others are dealing with her sidekicks while Ryukyu's trying to catch me. I'll be good for another half hour at least. Best Jeanist is tough. But he can't manipulate my tentacles, which are much stronger than my sleeves. They keep trying to attack me. I'll be fine. Endeavor's really tough. Nobody but me has gotten close to him, and we're only lasting because of our superior numbers, but we're doing okay. The fires are a little annoying though. Izuku raised his hand, gesturing to the thick smoke billowing from the flames. The back smog immediately moved downwards, smothering the fires and putting them out. A column of flame rose to his right. They were Endeavor's sidekicks, doing well against the superior numbers. It was actually a surprisingly even fight. Endeavor himself was throwing flames into the sky, trying to hit Najire and another student who were buzzing around him annoyingly. Najire was blasting him with her quirk, and the other student was throwing rubble with telekinesis, which was melted as it got close. I'm here. The fires have been put out, and I got a whole lot of smoke out of it. He yelled, hovering beside Najire. We need to take him out. Unless he's subdued properly, he'll just keep burning the city until it's ash. The objective can't just be to beat the villains, these are the top 10 in the country. Maybe there's a time limit or something. Izuku replied, dodging a fireball. Izuku tried to wrap the number 2 hero in smoke, but the man dodged and sent more fire Izuku's way. Man, he is annoying. Being able to hover like that really ruins my tactics. And the fact that he's on fire means I can't use my usual dogfight maneuver unless I want to get roasted. Power. Mirio yelled, arriving on scene from the ground. P-power. Tamaki said weakly, arriving from the air. The sidekicks got finished up by the others, so they're tackling Ryukyu now. Mirio said, bouncing energetically on the spot. Best Jeanist underestimated the number of students that escaped his sidekicks and got overwhelmed. He was very nice about it too. Tamaki said. A fireball went through Mirio's head, while Tamaki protected himself with a tough clam shell. It's just Endeavor left then. He can fly low and slow, but it's good for dodging attacks. His fire prevents us from getting close from the air and on foot, and he melts through anything the other students throw at him. Izuku informed them. I'll go below. Mirio said. I'll go from behind. Tamaki nodded. I'll go high. Najire exclaimed. I'll be the distraction in the front. Izuku grinned. The big 3.5 moved. Endeavor didn't stand a chance. Izuku sent the picture of his license to his mother. He received several crying images in return. He left the building and walked back down to the bus, immediately getting hugged by a giant blue blur. Izuku, we did it. We did it, we did it. The bouncy periwinkle girl exclaimed. Mirio pulled Tamaki over into the group hug and the 3 older students started jumping around chanting we did it, we did it, we did it. Eventually, they let the embarrassed greenet go. Aizawa ruffled his hair as he passed, giving him a small grin. Everyone piled onto the bus, chattering excitedly as they drove back to UA. Every single second year had gotten their licenses this year, to their elation. Mijaya rambled from her seat beside Izuku about all the things she could do now that she could legally use her quirk to help others in public, while he just listened on fondly. The bus quickly reached the UA main campus, letting all of the students, no, heroes, pile off the bus. It may only be a provisional, but they were heroes now. Principal Nezu, thank you for meeting me on such short notice. Not at all. How could I refuse such an interesting request? The #1 hero wanting to teach at a school. Most would be surprised, but as I am one of the few in the know. My time is running short. I must search for a successor before one for all dies within me. You wish to pass it on to one of the students. An excellent idea, UA is the perfect environment to train the fledgling symbol of peace. Did you have anyone in mind already? Not as of yet. I would be happy to start with your recommendation however. Nezu smiled, turning to his laptop and typing at a few keys. The 3rd years are out of the equation. They're strong, but are months away from graduating. Not nearly enough time to train an entirely new power. There are 1 or 2 second years that would do well. But one student in particular really stands out above the rest. Tell me, did you see the sports festival this year? Unfortunately not. I was busy with a bank robbery. By the time it had finished up, the festival was over. Who is it you have in mind? The 1st year, Izuku Midoriya. He's only been with us for a few months, but he has already surpassed the 2nd years who see him as their equal, and possibly a few 3rd years also. All Might leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. Powerful quirk? He asked. Nezu's smile widened as he tapped a few keys on his computer. Actually Yagi, he had quite a weak quirk. The 2nd year I wanted to recommend also had an exceptionally weak quirk. Mr. Midoriya has smoke control, while Mr. Tagada has permeation. Weak how? Just from the descriptions they seem useful for hero work. Nezu turned the screen to face All Might. On it were 2 windows. One was of a small green-haired child with a fist-sized ball of smoke hovering above his open palm. The smoke occasionally moved from hand to hand, but little else. The other was a small blonde boy phasing through the floor and popping back out again. This would happen sporadically every few seconds. He was obviously struggling. Both boys' doctors believed that neither would gain much better control over either of their quirks. Mr. Midoriya would possibly gain a bigger controllable area, but only perhaps twice as much as is on screen now. Mr. Tagada was believed to never be able to fully control his unstable quirk. Nezu said. All Might hummed, watching the boys try to use their quirks on screen. What level are they at now? He asked. They're both top of the 2nd years, despite one being a 1st year and the other considered the worst in class in his own 1st year. Here, press the right arrow key. All Might did. A new pair of videos popped up on screen, the contents of which made All Might's eyebrows rise. The first was of the blonde boy, now a teenager, wearing a bright colorful costume. He was facing off against several similarly costumed adults. All 20 went down in seconds. All Might barely kept up with the pseudo-teleportation. Power. Tagada shouted, striking a pose. The next video was even more impressive. It showed the green-haired boy, now older and in a dark hero costume, surrounded by a vortex of smoke, hovering several meters in the air above Gang Orca and an army of his sidekicks. All Might watched in awe as the sidekicks were eliminated instantly, leaving the boy facing off against a top 10 pro one-on-one. He was barely able to even call it a fight. The clip ended there. Those videos were both from the licensing exam yesterday. Mr. Tagada took down several of Ryukyu's sidekicks alone and then distracted her until the more heavy-hitting trainee students could arrive. Mr. Midoriya took down Gang Orca and all of his sidekicks single-handedly. Almost instantaneously. After those events, those two teamed up with Miss Hadu and Mr. Amajiki and proceeded to take down Endeavor 4-on-1. They what? All Might spat blood. The big 3.5, Mr. Midoriya, Tagada, Amajiki and Miss Hadu's friend group, took down Endeavor, the number 2 hero, in under 5 minutes after taking down Gang Orca, Best Jeanist, and assisting with Ryukyu's defeat. Endeavor was the hero assigned to Miss Hadu's area. It was a poor matchup, and she required a little aid from her friends, but paired up against any other member of the top 10, excluding yourself, I'm sure she would have fared better. Mr. Tagada too. And Mr. Midoriya is the half, in case you were wondering, because he's a first year. What? What are they like? Personality-wise? What are their goals? You'll have to ask them that yourself tomorrow. At the moment I'm pretty sure Mr. Midoriya has finally worked up the courage to ask Miss Hadu on a date and their friends are following them around town, using their new provisional licenses to excellent effect. I'll be here tomorrow as Toshinori Yagi, a talent scout for All Might's agency. I'll watch the first and second year festivals tonight. He said, still slightly shell-shocked that Endeavor had been taken down by a quartet of teenagers. Nezu chucked as he watched a man leave his office, turning the monitor back to himself. Tomorrow would be an interesting day. Izuku was going to die. This is it, this is what kills him. He'd asked Najira if she'd wanted to go somewhere, just the two of them. She'd then asked, you mean like a date? He'd said yes. So had she. So now, Izuku was dying, and Mirio was the one to hand him the shovel. Here, how about this? The blonde asked, hiding out a rather nice button-up shirt. The color matched his hair and had a very subtle checkered pattern of varying light and dark greens. Looks good, Mirio. He said, his eyes dead. Tamaki returned to them both holding a nice pair of black trousers that went surprisingly well with the shirt Mirio had chosen. Go try them on, I'll go and look for a nice hat. I don't need a hat, Mirio. Or new shoes. Or bow tie. Izuku replied, cutting off each of Mirio's responses before he even got them out. The teen just snapped his fingers with a muttered damn. Izuku put the clothes on in the changing room. He had to admit, they were nice. He stepped out and held his arms out slightly, raising his eyebrows. Mirio let out a wolf whistle, while Tamaki gave him a thumbs up. Shut up, Mirio. Izuku sighed, earning a laugh. The older boy gave him a pat on the back, grinning at him. Alright, I'm sorry. You look fine, Izuku, I'm sure she'll like it. He said, a fraction more seriously. Thanks. Izuku sighed. What's up? Tamaki asked. Nothing. He said. When he received disbelieving looks from his friends he sighed. Alright, maybe something. What if I make a fool of myself? What if she's going along with the whole date thing too because we've been over this before. You'll be fine. She's the one that specified whether it was a date or not, right? Yes. And I'm pretty sure we've been over this at least once in a park with you trying to eat a picnic table through your nose. Yes. Besides, it's just been the two of you together before. But this is a date. Not a Mirio scheme date. It's different, it's meant to be all romantic and you're not good at that, I know. But she also knows you're not good at that. Heck, she's really not good at that. You'll both be bumbling about like a pair of nervous wrecks until the end, then you'll both suddenly realize that you're being stupid, and of course the other person's not going to hate you, and then you'll end up together, and I get to say I told you so. Izuku just nodded. They met up near the arcade the Quadrio normally went to on their days out. Najira was already there waiting, wearing a pretty periwinkle blue dress that went just past her knees, the neckline high on her shoulders. She smiled brightly when she saw Izuku. Izuku. You look really nice. Why, you look very nice too, Najira. Mirio and Tamaki exchanged a glance before pulling out their phones behind the bush on the other side of the road. The duo, followed by the other duo, walked down a few streets until they came across a small cafe, which Izuku led Najira into. Izuku sat at a table near the back of the room, with Najira opposite him. He had tea, while Najira ordered a glass of juice. They conversed quietly for a few minutes, Najira the epitome of calm, while Izuku stuttered and sweat nervously. They ate lunch, then walked back to the arcade, playing a few games of Hero Smash and some generic claw machine games before leaving. Without Mirio there to police them, they both chose All Might, making the matches stretch on for longer than usual. Neither of them on anything on the claw games, both being terrible at them. When they left the arcade, Najira took Izuku's hand and walked beside him, smiling slightly red-faced. Mirio took hundreds of pictures, using his quirk to hold his phone out through walls to hide most of his body. Tamaki needed to give and take Mirio's phone each time, as the small device couldn't go through the walls with him. The two blushing teenagers arrived at the park and just wandered around, admiring the flower beds and each other. Mirio watched from a nearby tree trunk, while Tamaki watched from the branches above. Najira plopped down onto a bench, quickly followed by Izuku. Thanks for today, Izuku. I had lots of fun. Why yeah, me too. They sat in silence for a moment, Izuku's fidgeting growing more and more restless. I've wanted to do this a while. A proper date. Not like all of Mirio and Tamaki's little coincidences. Najira said suddenly. Izuku froze for a moment before wringing his hands. Me too. He said quietly. They sat in silence for another moment. Oh, sorry. You go first. No, it's fine, you go. Izuku wrung his hands again. I like you. As more than just friends. I know. Izuku's gaze shot up from the ground. Did you just? Yep. She said, popping the pea. And I do too. Ever since the end of term exam, I think. You do? He stuttered. Najira nodded enthusiastically, a blinding smile on her face. I've been trying to get it out for ages, but I just couldn't. What if you didn't feel the same? What if you laughed at me? What if you stopped being my friend? She rambled. I was the exact same way. Izuku exclaimed, the awkwardness dispersing faster than Izuku's smoke. Really? Man, liking someone makes people stupid. I know. And don't even get me started on Mirio. Ugh, he's been the worst. He knew. He knew about you too. He's been teasing me about it ever since the training camp. Izuku groaned, slumping back on the bench. We are totally getting him back for this the moment we even think he likes a girl. Agreed. Najira chirped. They sat in a comfortable silence, watching the few people out and about walk through the park. Would you like to do this again? Izuku asked. Of course. Najira said. They sat in silence for another few minutes. Would you like to be my boyfriend? Najira asked, red spreading across her cheeks. Izuku's gaze lowered to his red trainers. Yes. I'd like that a lot. He said. Izuku and Najira parted ways outside classroom 1A with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. He stepped into the room and started down at his desk, still in a sort of daze, not quite believing this was happening to him. Aizawa walked in and gave Izuku a grin. Alright, internships. Normally, first years don't go on these, both because they can't get their provisional and they're hardly ever scouted by hero agencies. You've got both. I actually got an offer from Might Tower, which I think I'll take. I went underground for my work study, so I'll go Limelight for my internship and vice versa next year. Aizawa sighed. It's a good idea to balance out what experiences you have. I just wish it wasn't with that oaf though. Izuku raised an eyebrow. You hate All Might that much? Why? Aizawa grumbled. He spends more time in interviews and doing merchandise deals than actually doing his job. His laugh is annoying, and his hair is ridiculous, his smile infuriates me, and he has no fashion sense whatsoever. Who the hell wears such an ugly yellow suit? He ranted, breathing heavily. Izuku snickered, holding his hands out. Sorry. Didn't realize you despise positivity so much. He teased. Well, you've learned something new. The man said grumpily. Izuku entered Might Tower with a bright smile on his face. He'd dreamed of coming here ever since he was 4, the greatest hero agency in the world. He walked over to the purple-skinned woman at the front desk. Hello. I'm Izuku Midoriya, here for my internship. He said with a polite bow. The woman smiled, typing a few keys on her computer. Please enter the lift to your right, it will take you straight to the 25th floor where All Might is waiting for you. Izuku nodded, thanking the receptionist before heading into the large steel box, waiting patiently as it rose to the top floor. The golden doors opened, revealing All Might in his buff form, posing like that old athlete Usain. Quick. Fast. He was still considered one of the fastest quirkless men in history, although Izuku couldn't remember his name off the top of his head. I am here. Posing dramatically to welcome young Midoriya to my agency. The hero exclaimed. Izuku grinned every time he saw the hero he admired most. Now was not any different. Thank you for having me here, sir. He said. The hero laughed boisterously. Not at all, young Midoriya. I look forward to using my many years of experience to help you on your way to becoming a great hero. All Might said. You can deflate if you like, I'm sure it must be tiring keeping that form up. The teen said. Mr. Yagi deflated into his secret identity, the hero costume hanging off of his now bony form. Thank you, young Midoriya. I did not mention this last time, but I am only able to retain my hero form for around 3 hours a day, severely limiting my work. He explained. What happened? The man patted his left side. Around 5 years ago I was injured in a big fight against a terrible villain. I won, but at the cost of my time as a hero. He said. 5 years. You mean against Toxic Chainsaw? Izuku asked. All Might laughed. You really know your stuff, kid. That lowlife though? He couldn't touch me. No, this fight I requested be kept secret from the public so that people would not lose faith in the symbol of peace. Izuku nodded in understanding. There would be mass panic. That's why you're looking for a successor, someone to take the mantle when hell inevitably breaks loose. I'm sure you'll find the right person, and even if you don't, Mirio will be happy to take it. He joked. The hero laughed, putting his hands on his hips and buffing up, striding over to the lift. Who did young Tagada in turn with in the end? He asked. Your old sidekick, Sir Night-Eye. He thought that with his quirk, it would be better to go with a strategy-oriented hero rather than brute strength. Izuku explained. All Might nodded as the lift reached the ground floor and the doors opened. A good choice. Young Tagada will benefit well from learning under Night-Eye. Now, I see you have your costume case. Go and get changed through there, the room down the corridor, 3 doors on the left. We'll be going on patrol. Wisp and All Might stepped out of the front doors of Might Tower, immediately getting swarmed by reporters. The hero just laughed. One at a time, and quickly please. We only have time for a few questions before heading off. All Might exclaimed. All Might, are you finally taking on another sidekick after Sir Knight I left to form his own agency? One woman asked. Not at this moment. Young Wisp here is a provisional hero interning under me for the next month to learn all about daylight heroics. He said, clapping his large hand onto Wisp's shoulder. You say he is here to learn about daylight heroics, does that mean he plans on focusing on the elusive underground? A man asked. I had originally planned to go into underground heroics before I realized my quirk's full potential under my homeroom teacher's tutelage. I want to experience both sides before making a decision. Wisp responded. This is your first intern ever, All Might. What made you decide to offer Wisp a place at your agency? A woman asked. His exemplary performance at both the sports festival and his provisional license exam caught my eye. The inventive ways he utilizes such a simple quirk are awe-inspiring. I have also recently become interested in teaching to pass down my knowledge and many years of experience. I'm quite an old man, you know. He exclaimed. Wisp. How is it interning under the #1 hero? Wisp shrugged. It's only my first day here, so I wouldn't know. I am looking forward to learning from the best there is. I've been an All Might fan ever since I was 4. Speaking of your first day, young Wisp, we should get going for our patrol. All Might interrupted. Wisp nodded, letting twin clouds of smoke eject themselves from the sides of his mouthguard and lower them to encase his legs from the knee down. Knowing what was about to happen, the press stepped back, not wanting to be blown away by All Might's jump. The hero grinned at the intern. Do try to keep up, young man. I won't be going easy on you. He challenged, bending his knees. The smoke condensed around Wisp's legs as he too crouched down. Wouldn't dream of it, sir. He accepted. All Might leapt into the sky with a bellowing laugh, leaving shockwaves in his wake. Wisp followed close behind, propelling himself with the dark greaves on his legs. The symbol of peace grinned at him from the left, using powerful kicks to generate gusts of wind and propel himself forwards. Now, let me tell you all about heroism while we search for wrongdoers. The man said. He glanced over at the television set in the corner of the room, his piercing red gaze focused on the muscular man on screen. His exemplary performance at both the sports festival and his crimson eyes moved to the teenager on All Might's left, who stood with confidence at the sight of the symbol of peace. The boy's costume was simple, efficient, and intimidating towards villains. It would be easily recognizable should he become famous, not because it was trying to be, but because it wasn't. He watched as the camera panned up to show the boy keeping up with All Might in the sky above, trails of black smoke being left in his wake. On top of all that, All Might himself saw something in the young hero. Wisp. His raspy voice came, with a grin slowly spreading across his scarred, deformed face. Another true hero. Stain turned off the television, picking up his chipped blade. It's time to hunt once again. Wisp dropped onto the road silently, the smoke dampening both his fall and the noise he made. Dark tendrils lashed out and grabbed the 5 bank robbers, taking the bags of money from them and setting them at the side of the road. It's Wisp. The smoke hero. He's so cool. Damn you. One of the villains struggled. Wisp put his finger to his ear. I have the bank robbers, sir. The police are just arriving now. Excellent work. Once everything's resolved there, meet me back at my office. I finished up with those hooligans rather quickly. All Might said, the whistling of wind coming through the earpiece. The police took the 5 villains from Wisp, tipping their caps politely as he nodded in return. He waved to the civilians and jumped into the sky, flying towards Might Tower in the distance. Working with All Might for the past month had made Wisp a very popular hero. The hero and intern often split up mid-flight to sort out different incidents, which greatly reduced the strain on All Might's hero form, as he didn't need to rush to resolve every incident in the city. There was already fan-made merchandise being sold online, and he'd seen children playing heroes vs villains with a mouthguard similar to his own in various parks around the city. Wisp landed outside Might Tower's main entrance, nodding politely to the media and heading inside, ignoring their jumbled-up questions. He headed up to the top floor and removed his mouthguard, letting it hang around his neck. All Might greeted him in his skinny form, seated behind his large desk. Young Midoriya, excellent timing. Izuku sat down opposite the hero with a smile. Mr. Yagi. So, today's the last day of your internship with me until after the school festival, unless you wish to transfer to a different agency. Izuku shook his head. I would be honored to return in 3 weeks, if you'll still have me. He said. Mr. Yagi laughed. Of course, my boy. Having you here has been a great help to both my aptitude at teaching and my time in my hero form, not to mention the paperwork. They were able to get all of the paperwork done in half of the time it normally took Yagi after patrol ended, which the hero was extremely happy about. Even after only a month he could understand the hero's hatred of paperwork. Yagi and Izawa weren't fond of it, and now neither was Izuku. Then I suppose I'll see you in 3 weeks, sir. Izuku said. Yagi smiled, holding out his hand and shaking Izuku's. I look forward to it. I hope that you and young Tagada can share your experiences with the rest of the big 3.5. He said. Izuku groaned. I'm the half, aren't I? He asked deadpan. Mr. Yagi just nodded, his grin widening. Izuku stepped off of the train and was immediately assaulted by a periwinkle missile called Najire. A blonde missile wasn't far behind, followed closely by Tamaki. Izuku. How was your internship? You've been on TV all month with All Might. What did you learn? Was he cool? How many villains did you take down? His girlfriend asked. Najire. It was great, I learned a lot about patrols and paperwork, he was extremely cool, and I lost count. Izuku responded. Mirio just patted him on the back with a grin. Well, if it isn't the number 1.5 hero. Mirio joked. I've heard enough about being a half in one group already, I don't need you spreading that around too. Izuku grumbled. Too late, that's what the media's calling you. Mirio said delightedly. Izuku glared at Mirio, then noticed what he was wearing. A Wisp t-shirt. He groaned again, slumping into Najire, who was still hugging him fiercely while Mirio cackled, puffing his chest out with Izuku's masked face printed on it. All the attention. I could never do that. Tamaki said quietly with a shudder. Inko came over from where she'd been watching the four reunite, hugging Izuku once Najire let him go. Izuku. You're such a cool hero already. She exclaimed. The five of them eventually made their way to the Midoriya apartment where Inko had made katsudon for everyone. It's the school festival soon. Izuku said after swallowing a bite of his dinner. Got any ideas for what the class should do? I'm entering the beauty pageant. Najire said. I don't want to do anything. Tamaki whispered. Dunk the hero student. Mirio exclaimed. That'll be therapeutic. Izuku said. Do I have to pay for that, or? The teenagers laughed before moving back to the topic. We could do a stage performance. Najire wondered. Am I going to have to do my own thing since I'm technically part of class 1A? Izuku asked suddenly. You can ask Eraserhead tomorrow. Mirio told him. Izuku nodded. I'll do that. I'm sure you won't have to do your own thing, you'll probably get to join in with 2A. Najire said optimistically. Yeah, you've got to do your own thing. Aizawa said. Izuku groaned, sliding a hand down his face. Got any suggestions? He asked hopefully. Aizawa shrugged, slurping on a jelly packet. Haunted house. He suggested. Izuku thought for a minute. That's not a bad idea. He murmured. Izuku spent the next week using his quirk to create a haunted house made entirely of thick smoke. The walls were black, the ghosts were white, the creatures were gray, and the zombies were green splattered in red. Only one group of people could enter at a time, as the whole thing needed precise control, but it was relatively well made, and the walls, floor and ceiling of the passageways were solid enough for groups of frightened teenagers. He had Mirio, Najire and Tamaki tested out for him on their breaks from the 2A Dunk hero construction. Mirio came out laughing but drenched in sweat, while Najire was screaming and running for her life. Tamaki was unfazed. They're not real people, so they're not scary. He'd said. I don't need to imagine they've got potato heads, it's just smoke. The mouse became the lion it seems. By the end of the second week, everything was ready for the school festival to begin. Izuku jogged over to his section off area, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. There was around an hour until the main gates opened, plenty of time to get his haunted house up and running. His friends came and joined him after 15 minutes or so, while he was just putting up the finishing touches to his attraction. We're all finished up with the Dunk a Hero. Everyone's going to take turns getting dunked apart from Najire. Mirio said. I'll be able to join once the beauty pageant is over. The girl said. I'm going to get all soggy. Tamaki groaned. I'll get laughed at, and no hero will want to intern me. Izuku just patted the boy on the back consolingly. I can help once everybody's too afraid of the haunted house to enter. Izuku offered. Mirio gave him a thumbs up, grinning at the greenet. Great. I let the others know to keep a slot on the schedule open. The students' families arrived after another 15 minutes, half an hour earlier than the general crowd. Inko refused to enter the haunted house in fear of flooding the campus. Mirio's dad enjoyed dunking his son in the water by throwing a basketball into a hoop. Tamaki's mother was just as timid as the boy, while his father seemed like a regular guy, no quirky personality traits. Najire's mother was just like her daughter, inquisitiveness and everything. Her father was a large, soft-spoken man with a dark blue mane of hair and beard. Everyone went around the attractions together, the parents meeting for the first time and talking about their children, much to the big 3.5's embarrassment. When the time came for the main gates to open for the public, the four went to their separate events. Izuku to his haunted house, Tamaki and Mirio to the Dunk a Hero, and Najire to the beauty pageant after a good luck kiss from Izuku. The green had a blast using his smoke constructs to scare the hell out of a bunch of UA students and adult civilians alike. He went a little easier on the younger kids, only making 1 or 2 ghosts float out towards them. At one point Aizawa and present Mick came over to have a go. They both came out wearing vastly different expressions. Mick was white-faced and trembling, his eyes wide and darting around. Aizawa was grinning at Izuku, giving him a discreet thumbs up for the smoke bugs he'd created on a whim. Shouted. Let's go back to the 3rd years. They won't try to traumatize me. The fully grown, adult hero with years of experience whined. Izuku and Aizawa rolled their eyes in unison, still grinning at one another as the next group went in. Around an hour later, a skeletal man in a yellow pinstriped suit came along. "Young Midoriya," he called. "Mr. Yagi. What are you doing here?" Izuku asked, a smile on his face. "Well, I'm all out of time for the day, and I still had some paperwork for Nezu about next year's job, so I thought I'd come say hello." Izuku gestured to the haunted house. "Would you like to see my project? I'm using my smoke constructs to excellent effect to create a haunted house." Toshinori hummed to himself, admiring the black castle-like structure. "It's been many years since I've been in such an attraction. Very well, I shall endeavor inside." 10 minutes later he emerged from the exit screaming one name as a smoky yellow blur followed him. Torino Sensei. Aizawa was a very useful mine of All Might information. Especially on an elderly hero called Gran Torino that absolutely terrified the symbol of peace. The stories where All Might threw up were a favorite of the underground heroes. Nezu occasionally supplied him with the old camera footage when he was having a particularly bad day, which was quite thoughtful of the principal. Once everyone had been forewarned of the haunted house and steered clear of it, Izuku let his construct blow away and headed to the 2nd year's dunking booth. He arrived just in time to watch Mirio get dunked by a small boy with bright pink hair. Izuku cheered alongside his unofficial classmates as Mirio plopped into the water with a shriek that was cut short by gurgling. "We made the water extra cold," Homura confessed, forming ice along his fingertips. Izuku just laughed. There was a splash, and Mirio surfaced. "That's really cold," he shouted, turning to his classmates. "Homura." After maybe half an hour it was Izuku's turn to sit above the vat of freezing water, smiling at the line of kids ready to throw some basketballs. 5 minutes later, and he still hadn't been plunged. Mirio grabbed one of the balls and threw it at the hoop, but was intercepted by Izuku, who tossed the ball right back at him, smacking him in the face with it. Another 3 minutes saw the same pink-haired boy throw a ball perfectly into the hoop, plunging Izuku straight into the water. Once the first 3 hours or so of the festival had passed, Izuku, Mirio and Tamaki went through to the dressing room for the beauty pageant to wish Najire good luck. She had gone for an elegant dress that matched her hair, reaching just above the ground when she wore heels. There was a single shoulder strap on the left side, leaving her right shoulder bare. Her hair was styled into a spiraling braid down her back, leaving 2 strands to frame her face. She looked stunning, and Izuku made sure to tell her as much. There were only 5 girls taking part in the pageant including Najire. 2 from the 2nd years and 3 of the 3rd years. Izuku sat between his mother and Mirio when the pageant began, who both chattered away with one another about each of the contestants. Personally, Izuku thought they'd all overdone their makeup, or their clothes were too ornate, or the hairstyles too intricate. Mirio elbowed him every time the next person walked on stage, grinning at him, as though he knew what he was thinking. "Fight me. Give me the time and place, bro. Once the pageant is over. Jim Beta. I'm gonna beat your A. You. I'm going to beat you." Inko raised an eyebrow at the slip but didn't comment, finding Izuku's reaction as amusing as Mirio did. Then Najire floated on stage. Inko and Mirio applauded, while Tamaki waved meekly to show his support. Najire's parents both cheered, and most of the crowd cheered alongside them. Izuku blue-screened. Mirio glanced over and snorted, turning his phone on and recording Najire floating around, then panning over to Izuku's expression. Inko was in the background of the video covering her mouth and giggling to herself as her son just sat there. "So Izuku, what's your impression of the pageant so far?" Mirio asked in an announcer's voice. "Huh?" he responded. "An excellent opinion. Thank you for sharing your insight into the event." Izuku blinked and shook his head, tearing his gaze away from his gorgeous girlfriend and focusing on Mirio. "What? Sorry, I spaced out for a second there. Wait, are you recording? Mum, what's so funny?" "Mirio, what?" The 2 traitors collapsed into fits of giggles while Izuku just sat in confusion. "Ah, young love," Mr. Yagi said from Inko's right, grinning at Izuku from over her head. Izuku's face turned a dark red. "Mr. Yagi, not you too." Najire won the pageant by a landslide. Wisp and All Might were once again patrolling the city, sailing through the sky at almost impossible speeds. Working alongside the top hero had really helped Wisp improve his quirks control and power in order to keep up with the pro. He was able to match All Might's top speed in the air, utilizing his dark cloak pushed to its very limits. He couldn't generate nearly as much pure physical force as All Might, but he could stop it instantly with a Detroit shield. All Might's Detroit smash caused 10 of the 12 layers to be destroyed, the 11th cracked beyond further use, and the 12th fractured slightly. Izuku was also pushed back several meters by the shockwave, but didn't fall over. Wisp's reputability had become somewhat similar to that of All Might's over the past 2 months of working alongside the symbol of peace. Most petty thieves surrendered at his presence, not even trying to run or fight back. Actual villains took a bit of struggling before they gave in, but most knew it was futile to fight back against All Might's personal apprentice. Soon enough the mere mention of his name would stop villains in their tracks just like All Might's. And rumble in the distance alerted the heroes to an ongoing villain attack. "I shall deal with that young Wisp," All Might said. "Keep watch to make sure it's not a distraction." "Aye aye sir." All Might kicked the air and shot off like a bullet towards the dust clouds, leaving Wisp to scout around the area. This had been their go-to routine the past 2 months. One of them goes to deal with the incident, the other remains behind to keep an eye out for other villains, willing to take advantage of the distraction. It often wasn't needed, the fact that All Might or even just Wisp were sighted in the area would make most villains hide away. I'm the few cases where it was necessary though. Wisp dropped out of the sky, landing silently in the alleyway. He reached up and removed his cold steel mouthguard, smiling at the small girl standing before him. Izuku knelt down to reach her eye level, his small smile still present on his face. "Hello there. What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl just stared at him, her whole body trembling slightly. Now that he was closer, he could see the clean bandages wrapped around her arms and legs and the tattered hospital gown she wore. The little skin he could see was dirty, and her silvery white hair was long and matted, tangled behind her head in a mucky knot. "My name's Izuku. I'm a hero, do you know what those are?" The girl nodded, the trembling more subdued now. "Are you hurt anywhere?" "You're a little mucky, did you run away from home?" he asked. She'd obviously gotten those bandages recently, they weren't covered in the same amount of dirt and grime as the rest of her. Either she wrapped them herself, or she was being neglected or abused. Again the girl nodded, this time less hesitantly. "Do you want to come with me?" "Aye. Irie, there you are." Izuku looked up at the voice, his gaze sweeping over the newcomer's appearance. He had close-cropped brown hair and shining golden eyes. The lower half of his face was covered by a long, beak-like mask. He wore a green jacket with purple fur trim around the collar and white surgical gloves on each hand. Irie took the last few steps over to Izuku's kneeling form and grabbed onto the front of his costume with both hands. She was trembling even harder than before. "Please. Don't send me back," she whispered. Izuku frowned minutely before looking back up at the newcomer. "Hello, sir. Do you know this girl?" he asked, plastering a pleasant smile onto his face. The man nodded, his own fake smile narrowing his eyes. "Yes, thank you for finding her hero. Irie is my daughter, she'd just run away after a scolding, I'm sorry if she bothered you." Izuku placed a comforting hand on the girl's head, patting softly. To his surprise, there was a small horn on her right temple buried beneath her matted hair. "Not at all, I'm happy to help. But I have to ask about the bandages, mister," he said apologetically. "Chisaki. Kai Chisaki. And it's alright, children are quite clumsy you know, and things get a little rough when they try to play hero, understand?" Chisaki asked. Izuku laughed, not finding the situation humorous in the least. "Don't I know it? I remember getting roughed up all the time playing heroes with the other kids. But I always made sure to give the arrogant villains a bloody nose in return." He chuckled, getting to his feet with Irie held securely in his arms. Chisaki tugged on his right glove, pulling it just off of his hand. "Well, if you just return my daughter to me we can be on our way," he said. Irie tried to move back to Chisaki, but Izuku kept her in place, smiling at the man. "I don't think so, sir." Chisaki's eyes narrowed, his fingers flexing as he pulled the glove away completely. "And why would that be?" he spat. Izuku looked over the man's shoulder as a crash rang through the alleyway. "Because he is here," Izuku exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. Chisaki paled, spinning around to face an upturned dustbin with a small cloud of smoke drifting beside it. The smoke moved, forming 4 distinct shapes. "Bye." Chisaki's eyes shot down as he felt something grab his ankles, holding him in place. There was a thin layer of dark smoke swirling just above the ground, which had condensed around his feet. By the time he'd freed himself, Izuku and Irie were long gone. Izuku soared above the city, the tiny white-haired girl cradled against his chest as he pressed a finger to his ear, turning on his comms. "Sir, I ran into an incident." "What is it, young Wisp? Do you require assistance?" "No, it's fine. I ran into a little girl in an alleyway. She's covered in dirt and has bandages on her arms and legs. I'm currently en route to the nearest hospital, I can give you a proper report there. Very well, I shall meet you there soon, Wisp. Izuku arrived at the hospital and pushed through the door, with Eri still cradled in his arms. He was immediately approached and led through to a small room with a single bed. Eri would not allow the doctors to touch her, so Izuku needed to unwind the bandages on her limbs as the doctors and nurses watched on. Izuku scowled to himself when her arm was uncovered, revealing many wounds, old and new. The vast majority were puncture wounds from a needle, but there were a few straight surgical scars crisscrossing her forearm. Eri's other arm and both legs were the same, covered in vast amounts of scar tissue and fresh wounds. One of the doctors used his quirk to disinfect the most recent injuries, and another used her quirk to heal them. They couldn't do much about the older scars, so most of the healers left the room. The door over there leads into a bathroom, please make sure little Eri is all cleaned up. She will need to stay in the hospital for a while, so that we can keep watch over her, but so long as she is looked after properly, Eri should be just fine. As you are the only person she'll even let get near her, you'll have to remain here with her to ensure her checkups and treatments go smoothly. A nurse told Izuku. The greenette nodded, getting to his feet with Eri still in his arms. That is fine. Someone should be here soon to get a report from me, please let him up. He informed her. The nurse nodded and left the room, leaving Izuku and Eri by themselves. The greenette carried the girl into the adjoining bathroom and set her down on the closed toilet seat. He turned to the bathtub and twisted the taps, filling it slowly with warm water. The teen put his gloves aside and picked up one of the bottles set on the rim, pouring a decent amount of pink liquid into the water. Izuku turned to Eri, who was staring at the bubbles as they filled the bath. He pulled the ragged hospital gown over her head and picked the girl up, dunking her into the bubbly bath. He picked up another bottle and dumped a good amount onto her matted hair, tangling his fingers through the messy locks and rubbing the shampoo in before rinsing it all out. He repeated that around 3 or 4 times to make sure her hair was properly clean, then picked up a flannel, soaked it in water, and rubbed her face with it. Izuku smiled when he pulled the washcloth away from her face. So there was a little girl hiding under all that dirt. He joked, earning the barest hint of a smile from Eri. Once the tiny girl was all cleaned up, Izuku picked her back up and set her on the bath mat, taking a fluffy towel and dumping it over her head before drying her long hair furiously. The quietest giggles came from beneath the towel before he pulled the top back, letting her smiling face pop out. He stuck his tongue out at the girl playfully, picking up the bundled up child and carrying her through to the main room and setting her down on the hospital bed. Izuku held the new hospital gown up over Eri's head and dropped it over her, letting the girl wriggle herself into the garment. There we go, you're all cleaned up. He exclaimed, tossing the towel onto the floor and spinning around with Eri in his arms. Izuku set the silver-haired girl down and combed his fingers through her messy hair, straightening and untangling it slightly. There was a quiet knock at the door, which Izuku smiled at. That's probably my boss. He whispered to Eri. I'm going to go and talk to him, but I promise I'll be right back, okay? Eri held onto his costume, staring up at him with big crimson eyes. You promise? She asked quietly. Izuku thought for a moment before reaching up and tugging his mouthguard away from his neck, handing it to Eri. Here, hold this for me. It's the most important part of my costume, so I'll definitely be back, I promise. He smiled. Eri nodded, holding onto the piece of equipment like it were a teddy bear, her eyes never leaving the greenette. Izuku stood and walked over to the door, opening it and giving Eri a smile. I'll only be 5 minutes. Toshinori Yagi was a rather optimistic man. Even in his emancipated form, his smile rarely left his face. He tried to think the best of everyone he met, including the villains he faced, and hardly ever lost his temper. But right now, Toshinori Yagi was angry. No, he was furious. How dare someone hurt a little girl in such a way, and in the very city he himself patrolled regularly. What kind of disgusting evil piece of shit did that? I promise you this, young Izuku. Should you ever find the man that did this again, the fury of All Might will be on your side. He said to his apprentice. The greenette nodded. He has a touch-based quirk, but not 5-point contact. Possibly some kind of matter manipulation, as he seemed comfortable at the idea of fighting me at range. The only reason he's not already rotting in a cell is because I didn't want to endanger Eri, and I didn't know how his quirk would affect my smoke. Toshinori nodded. A wise decision. I too would have prioritized little Eri's safety over apprehending the villain. He said. The hero thought for a moment. There's only a week left of your internship. Use this week to look after Eri, see if you can find anything out from her. He raised a hand at Izuku's intake of breath. I'm not saying to pry for information, just ask sometime if she wants to talk about it or if she minds answering a few questions. Eri has already been through a lot, for now our job is to make sure she lives happily from now on. The hero in training nodded in agreement. They parted ways after another moment, the greenette returning to the hospital room, while the blonde headed back to Might Tower to begin his investigations and reach out to some old contacts. Izuku opened the door and peeked inside. Eri was laying on her back, the steel mouthguard still wrapped in her embrace like a lifeline. The teen smiled, entering and closing the door quietly, heading to the girl's bedside and shifting the covers. Izuku finished tucking Eri into the bed and sat in one of the uncomfortable chairs beside the bed. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it, taking a long pull. They weren't addictive, but it had become habit to light one when he had nothing to do. Izuku awoke to a tiny figure clambering into his lap and snuggling into his chest. He opened his eyes and tilted his head down from where it had lolled back in sleep, staring into a pair of big red eyes. "Sorry, Mr. Izuku," Eri said quietly. The teen just smiled, patting the girl's head. "It's alright, thank you for waking me." He smiled. "And Izuku is fine, you don't need to use honorifics with me." The tiny girl nodded, letting her head flop back down onto Izuku's chest. They spent the next few minutes just sitting there, Izuku gently combing his fingers through Eri's shining silver hair. "Did you sleep well?" Izuku asked after another moment. The girl nodded. They spent another long while just sitting in silence. "Are you feeling okay? Do any of your cuts still hurt?" Eri shook her head, her horn butting against Izuku's collarbone. After another 15 minutes, a nurse came into the room. "Ah, you're both awake. Do you think young Eri would be up for another little exam?" The rest of the week practically flew by. Izuku stayed with Eri in the hospital the entire time, occasionally visited by Supervisor Yagi. At one point, after Eri had decided that she was able to talk about what had happened to her, a detective with a truth quirk came and asked Eri a few questions. He also got a description of Chisaki from Izuku and confirmed that he was the new leader of a Yakuza group, the Shai Hasekai. Inko visited on her days off, immediately falling in love with the adorable little girl that clung to her son. In turn, Eri very quickly warmed up to Inko, possibly because of the obvious relation between her and Izuku. Mirio and Najire were unable to visit, with Sir Night-Eye being a tough taskmaster and Ryukyu operating on the other side of the country. Tamaki didn't visit, but only because he didn't want to bother Eri. The last day of Eri's stay in the hospital had come. The little girl, now dressed in a cute little red dress, held Izuku's hand as they entered the reception of the hospital. Inko and Izawa were waiting for them, the former beaming happily while the other just smirked. Izuku looked between the chipper adults warily. "What's got you so happy?" he asked his teacher suspiciously. "Eri's living situation has been figured out," the man replied. The little girl's grip tightened in Izuku's hand. Inko kneeled down. "If you want to, sweetie, you can come and live with me and Izuku," she said gently. Eri's eyes immediately lit up. Izuku stood a little straighter, staring at Izawa in disbelief. I get to live with you and Izuku?" she asked, bright red eyes shining hopefully. Inko nodded, barely reacting in time when the small silver-haired blur launched herself into the woman. I want to stay with you," she cried. Izuku just raised his eyebrows at his softy mentor. Izawa rolled his eyes before gesturing to the adorable child. Point taken. Unfortunately, Izuku needed to return to school the very next day. His trio of friends badgered him about his new little sister, to which he showed them all the pictures Inko had taken whenever she visited them in the hospital. Of course, they all immediately fell in love with the sunshine child, vowing to protect her smile no matter what. Exams came and went, internship offers were extended to next year, and the Elite Four of UA graduated to their next respective years. Izuku was ecstatic when he was promoted from half to whole. Mirio actually organized a party with the rest of the new 3A, for which he was punched, hugged and thanked for. In that order. By Izuku. Eri Midoriya was going to start going to school when the new school year began and was nervous but excited to start, although she'd miss seeing Inko all day, she couldn't wait to make friends. And so the UA entrance exams came again. The Elite Four were invited to spectate and help the teachers keep watch over the vast model cities. They of course couldn't award rescue points, but they helped keep track of who earned what points, did that immobilization count, which robots were deactivated by the invisible girl, and so on. There was a minor problem in testing Ground D, where a brown-haired girl got trapped under some rubble in the path of the zero-pointer, but a boy with a speed quirk resolved it quickly. "Mr. Midoriya," the principal said, turning away from the monitors. Izawa cracked one eye open. "Yes, sir?" Izuku asked. "As you no doubt know, we will have a new member of staff teaching heroics this year," the mammal began. Izawa's other eye opened. "Wait. Oh god. Oh no. Please don't, I don't want to, you can't make me, no. As you are the only member in the second-year hero course, and quite possibly the top heroic student cross your group, I was wondering if you would mind becoming a teaching assistant during those lessons with the first years. Your homeroom could also be. Don't say it. Merge with theirs, if that is not a problem." It seems we've got plenty of excellent students this year, unlike your own former classmates. Aizawa sat up slowly. Phew. Izuku walked down the hallway, Mirio on his left and Najira on his right, her hand holding his own gently. Tamaki was on the other side of Mirio, trying to cower away from the other students in the hallways as they walked. Man, I can't wait to see who the new heroics teacher is gonna be. Najira said. Probably a prominent pro, because of how hush-hush they're keeping things. Mirio theorized. Maybe they just don't like attention. Tamaki muttered. Mirio nodded. You could be right. He agreed as they came upon classroom 3A. You're still in the one Harem, right? Najira asked. Izuku nodded. Yeah, just for convenience's sake. We never really did anything in homeroom anyway because, well, just you. Mirio said. Yeah. Izuku sighed. Just me. But he told me not to go today, although I'm not sure. The greenette trailed off as he got a good look out the window to the field below. There was Aizawa, with a class of 20 standing nervously before him. The quirk assessment test. I'd almost forgotten. He muttered. Mirio clapped Izuku on the shoulder with a grin. Well, we've got to go, you have fun with the little firsties. He said, turning to 3A. Tamaki just smiled, following after Mirio. Najira gave Izuku a quick peck on the lips before bouncing after the other third years. The greenette grinned, turning and walking back the way he'd come, pulling out a cigarette as he went. Aizawa stared down his latest class of wild children, cursing Nezu internally. There were the quiet ones, the happy ones, the stoic silent ones, the brash loud ones and one Bakugo Kitsuki, nightmare incarnate. He would not be getting any sleep this year with that loud brat around. Alright, that's enough. He said in his signature monotone voice. They didn't quiet down for a further 10 seconds. Ugh. Today you'll be doing a quirk assessment test. He began. But what about orientation? The brunette, Uraraka, asked. This is the hero course. You have 3 years to become proper pros, you have no time to waste on pointless ceremonies. Problem child, excellent timing, what was your furthest ball throw in middle school? He asked, not even turning around. There was a sigh and a muttered damn from around the corner of the building before Izuku stepped out, cigarette in the corner of his mouth. Around 60 meters, Mr. Aizawa. He responded, ignoring the growl of Deku. Aizawa tossed Izuku the ball in his hand, smirking slightly at him. Throw it using your quirk. Anything goes so long as you don't leave the circle. The hero said, gesturing to the white circle painted onto the grass. Izuku nodded, holding the ball in his left hand and taking his cigarette from his lips with his right, extinguishing it with his quirk and putting the stub in his pocket. One of the students, the speedster with fast legs, tried reprimanding Izuku for smoking on school grounds with an extremely red face and chopping arms. Izuku released all of the smoke in his lungs, collecting and compressing every cubic centimeter into the palm of his right hand, all of the smoke he had condensing into a ball 1 centimeter in diameter. The greenette held the ball Aizawa had handed him by the tips of his fingers on his right hand, lining up his arm so that the condensed smoke would launch the ball at the optimal angle when it exploded. Then, he let it go, to the exclamations of awe from the first years. Just as quickly as the smoke ball exploded, it dissipated, stored once again within Izuku's lungs. The greenette turned to his mentor, a single eyebrow raised in question. A good few seconds later the hero turned the tablet around, displaying Izuku's score. 30k, not bad problem child. He droned. Class 1A broke out into excited chattering, eager to wield their own quirks in a similar fashion. Unfortunately for them, Aizawa wasn't having it. You think this is going to be fun? Alright then, how about this? Whoever comes last overall throughout these tests will be deemed to have no potential and will be immediately expelled from the hero course. He said with a cruel smirk. Welcome to UA. Izuku said, a similar smile on his face. Aizawa turned to Izuku. Shouldn't you be with your band of misfits goofing off somewhere? He asked. They all had to go to the opening ceremony. Ah. In that case I think Mr. Yagi is going to need your help with his lesson plans. Seriously, that idiot is going to get someone killed before the week is out. Izuku hastily nodded, turning on his heel and walking quickly away. Aye, Captain. He called. The Yaoi Rozu heiress raised her hand a moment later. What is it, Yaoi Rozu? I believe I'm speaking for everyone here when I ask who was that. She asked, prompting several nods amongst the others, although a scowl from Bakugo. Interesting. That was Izuku Midoriya, the only second-year member of the heroics course. He was the only one in his class who showed even the slightest amount of potential, and so was the only one not expelled. He said, grinning at the look of dawning horror on Yaoi Rozu's face. He is also the unofficial leader of UA's Elite Four, the top hero students in the school, though that position is often contested by Tagata. Among various other titles, Midoriya is All Might's personal apprentice and the man closest to usurping the #1 hero's position, even amongst pros. He, 1A, is your goal. That's it guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. With that, take care.